Chapter 1. I hissed from underneath the couch as a large black boot tried to kick me underneath it. My tiny claws came out, scratching at the leather, or trying to. They hadn't fully grown in, and they were very tiny. "Dad, please," Tommy begged, "don't kick her." "She fucking clawed me up again," the father spat out. "Look at my damn arm." "She's just a baby, she doesn't know any better," Billy said. "Please don't hurt her." Both of the boys were on the verge of tears. They were around 7 years old, and they had probably seen more violence than anyone else of their age, probably of twice and even triple their age, and all at the receiving ends of their father's fists. I tried to help, I really did, but I was a useless scrap of fur. Tommy and Billy both knelt down at the edge of the couch, holding their arms out, and I crept out stealthily so that they could pet my head and then pull me into their arms. "Keep the stupid animal out of my sight," Mr. Peters growled. "Yes, father," Billy and Tommy said together before they quickly ran up the stairs. "Try to stay out of father's way, okay, Snow?" Billy asked in that baby voice of his. "Okay," I mewed softly. They couldn't actually understand me, but I hoped they got the message. They stayed upstairs for about an hour. They switched between playing with me and playing with some plastic bricks. They built things out of them, along with little characters that they called Jay, Kai, Cole, Zane, Lloyd, Nia, and Sensei Wu. "Boys," their father called from downstairs, and my ears pricked up from where I was resting on the floor. "Downstairs now." I mewed softly as the boys scrambled to their feet. I lifted my head up, watching as they raced out of the room, their feet pounding on the wooden stairs in their rush to get downstairs. I rose up onto all four paws, which didn't really do much in the height difference, padding over to the open door. I walked across the hallway and stood at the top of the stairs, wondering if I should brave the stairs. I could hear glass plates in the kitchen being scraped as they were taken out of the cupboard. They were setting the table for dinner. I sniffed the air attentively, smelling burnt cheese and strange noodle thingies. It was the boys' favorite meal. I peered over the cliff edge of the first stair. It seemed like such a far drop. I hunched back on my hind legs, preparing myself for the downward leap. I leapt down onto the first step and instantly hated the feeling of the slick wood underneath my paws. I dug my tiny nails into the wood so that I didn't go sliding down the rest of them. I hissed at the stairs. Okay, just 14 more to go. I continued this maneuver of jumping down the stair before digging my nails into the slick wood before I made it to the bottom of the stairs. I trotted proudly into the living room, through the small dining room before I made it to the kitchen. The kitchen was being renovated, so it was all nice wooden floor that wasn't slicked, and I liked it a lot. "I thought I told you boys to keep that damn fur ball out of my sight," their father growled at the boys. "She's just hungry, Dad," Billy said. Not wanting them to get in trouble, I only went over to where my food bowl and water bowl were, licking up the stagnant water that was there. I then tried to make myself as small as possible in the corner, which wasn't too hard because I wasn't very big. I closed one eye, keeping another eye halfway open so that I could make sure nothing or no one crept up on me unwanted. "Get the dishes done before 8 o'clock, their father demanded, pushing back from the table, heading out to the living room. I could hear the sounds of the big black box turning on, loud cheers from that stupid show with idiots wearing big helmets and running on a large green field in a bowl with 2 yellow tinned forks there. The boys cleared the table. Billy scraped good food into the trash can, and Tommy started to run the sink so it was filled with water to put the now empty dishes in it. "Here, Snow," Billy said softly, giving me a small piece of chicken. I ate it eagerly, relishing the delicious treat. I wasn't sure why they didn't eat their good food, but I was glad because I got it now. I mewed quietly, padding over to where my little bed was. I stretched laying down on the bed. I cleaned myself a little while the boys were quiet, washing the dishes. Then I laid down, letting my tail wrap around my body, my ears lying flat, and I tucked my paws underneath me. Listening to the soft sounds of the sponge dip into the water and the smoothest of their hands running over the finished dishes put me to sleep quickly. Chapter 2. It had been a quiet day. Christmas break was coming soon for the boys, and they were excited about some party at their school. They were busy making art decorations in their bedroom with lots of colorful paper and scissors and some purple gunk I'd gotten on my paws. It made me cry at the bitter taste when I tried licking it off. Their father had gotten a very big tree and put it in the corner of the living room. I liked to climb it, crawling up inside the branches and hiding it there. The smell of pine was comforting, like a home touch. Eventually, when the first snow came down, they put large round balls on the tree along with characters from movies. Now when I climbed up inside the tree, I liked to bat them off so they fell to the ground. I was certain that they had been put up just for my amusement. Billy and Tommy took me outside when the snow fell. They were wearing big, bulky clothes, and most of their skin was covered up. I assumed it was like warm covering for them, the way my fur was. I did wish my fur was thicker, though, as I got cold very soon after. But I loved the snow. It was so fluffy and white and delicious. It was like water. It melted on my tongue, and I lapped up as much of the snow as I could. "Snow," Billy giggled. "Don't eat that. We need to build a snowman." "Why not eat? It's good," I mewed at him, continuing to lap at the snow. Tommy giggled, large gloved hands picking me up and lifting me to the windowsill, which I very much appreciated. Everything was so white. It was so sparkly, too, because of the sun in the sky. There were gray clouds blocking it for the most part, but it peeped through, making rainbow sparkles dazzle across everything. I loved the crisp smell of it, too. It was sharp and clear, a bit grainy at the same time, and cold. I settled on the brick ledge, though it was cold at first. It quickly warmed up. The boys were talking to each other about the party that was going to happen in 2 days, and then they were out of school again for a whole month. I wondered how long a month was. What was a month? "Like that, Snow?" Billy asked, and I perked my ear up, opening one eye. It had been a long time since they had said my name. "Repeat yourself," I mewed. "I'll take that as a yes," Billy said excitedly. "No, I didn't hear you the first time," I said. "Oh, I can't wait," Tommy grinned. "Maybe pink." "Pink what?" I asked. "Yes, we should ask Dad if we can get it," Billy said excitedly. "Get what?" I asked. "I don't see what the problem would be. It's our money after all. We can spend it how we want," Tommy said, though he looked a little scared. "What's money? Can I have some? Is it tasty?" "I wonder if she'll like it, though," Billy said thoughtfully. "Probably not. I don't like many things," I replied. "Aw, she's mewing like she wants our attention," Tommy said with a grin. "I do like that stuff," I mewed. "Let's take her back inside and we can warm up and give her lots of pets," Billy said with a toothy grin. "I agree," I mewed. We did just that. They curled up on the couch and I sprawled sleepily across Billy's legs as the two of them alternated between petting me and eating popcorn. Some cartoon was on about a great dumb dog that could solve crimes. It could talk. Billy and Tommy cheered at the end of the cartoon when the evil villain said, "And I would have gotten away with it too, if it weren't for you meddling kids." Were they just kids? They looked like adults to me, although I still wasn't sure if the red-haired and orange skirt person was a girl or a boy. Well, they were wearing a skirt, so it must be a girl, but I wasn't sure why her hair was so short. I liked the purple dress girl better. "Do you think another episode will come on?" Billy asked Tommy. "There should be," Tommy said excitedly. "There's 2 an hour and it's only 5:30. After that, there was another cartoon that had a dog that did karate. It was very strange. Why were they watching all these cartoons with dogs in them? I wanted something with cats. I mewed, pawing at the black rectangle that changed the screen, but Tommy just lifted it up out of the way so I didn't change the channel. The cartoons started to bleed into one another, turning into a pink creature on the screen, and there was no talking in it. I took a couple of cat naps before I heard the front door slam. I lifted my head, ears pricking, knowing it meant their father was home. "Boys," he shouted. "Yes, Dad?" they both called together. "We're going out to eat tonight. We're eating with some of my coworkers. You will be on your best behavior, do you understand?" he asked menacingly, undoing his work tie as he came into the living room. "And get that damned rat off the couch." Billy quickly lowered me to the floor, and I stretched, glaring up at him with my brown eyes. "Go and get dressed in your nice clothes," their father said, stomping out to the front hallway before I heard a huge crash. "Dad!" Tommy and Billy exclaimed, and I darted over to see the huge man had slipped in a puddle of water and fallen. That was strange. Where had the water come from? "Boys, why the fuck is there water on the floor?" their father asked as he got to his feet. "Sorry, Dad. It must have been from the snow from our boots when we came into the house," Billy said, cowering a little. Their father's eyes flashed, and I leaned back on my haunches, ready to launch myself at the man if he tried to hit them. Instead, he just started up the stairs, grumbling angrily about how he was going to have to change his clothes. "Clean up the damn water." "You go and get dressed," Billy said to Tommy. "I'll clean up the water." Tommy nodded, racing up the stairs, while Billy went to the kitchen to grab some paper towels. "But where did the water come from?" I asked when he got back. "Sorry, Snow, we're going to be heading out for a bit. I'll fill your food bowl when we leave, though. Sorry, we'll have to extend those plans for later." "What plans? I already forgot. And you didn't answer my question," I said, going to dip my tiny paw in the large puddle of water, but Billy quickly cleaned it up. "Sorry," he murmured again, petting the top of my head. He picked me up, carrying me to the kitchen, and putting me down on my bed. After only 10 or 15 minutes, they were gone, and the house was silent. I decided to wander around the house and explore to the best of my abilities. I hopped on the wooden stairs again, shredding them delightedly under my tiny claws. Even though there was shiny stuff on them to make them smooth, it was still wood. Once my marks were deep on the stairs, I went around remarking my scent on everything. For some reason, sometimes my marks seemed to wear off, and I didn't like that. I prefer when everything smelled like me. Perfect, I mewed an hour later. I had shredded the couch, climbed on the windowsill and knocked down the drapes, and had effectively knocked over the small lamp on the dresser, though it had taken many bats of my paws to do so. I settled down in the middle of the floor, in my chaotic perfection, to take a nap. What the hell? An angry roaring voice woke me up, and I became startled when a large hand lifted me up by the scruff of my neck. "Dad!" Billy shouted as I twisted in their father's large hand. "She's just a baby!" I mewed, scared and writhing. I wanted down. I didn't like being held like this. "Silence, boy!" Dad thundered. "I'm already pissed at you boys for leaving water on the floor and that stunt you pulled at the restaurant." The dad threw me to the dining room table. "Stay there." I cowered, trying to melt into the table. He was so scary. He was easily 6 foot, with a neatly trimmed black beard and dark green eyes. His hair was neatly trimmed as well, a bit of gray in his black strands. His arms were ripped and muscular. Apparently he'd been in a lot of sports or something. "You two sit your asses down on the couch," he grumbled, starting to slide his belt out of his pant loops. I cowered onto the table, closing my eyes and hiding my face behind my paws. I tried to get my ears to lie as flat on my head as possible. I hated this. I hated I couldn't do anything. I heard the sound of metal and leather cracking through the air before I heard Billy's cry. I mewed softly in pain. I couldn't interfere. That would make it worse on them. So I stayed where I was, hunkering down until it was over. "Don't you boys ever disgrace me like that ever again," he snapped. "Now off to bed with you. I need another drink." The boys scampered up the wooden steps, and I peeked my head up when I heard footsteps approaching the table. "You've made a fucking mess," he growled. So he didn't like my masterpiece? I thought it was lovely. "The drapes, I can fix. The lamp, I can fix. And the couch, I can fix," he growled, picking me up again. My head was above the fist he made, though my body and my tail was sticking out of the bottom. The rest of my body was in his fist. I was very squished and in pain. "But the fucking wooden stairs you clawed up, how am I supposed to get that fixed?" I bit his thumb and he hissed, shaking his hand, but didn't let me go. "Stupid cat. Why do you care so much about your stairs anyway? You just walk on them," I muttered. "I hate you so much. I don't know how I let those boys talk me into getting you. Fucking drain of money you are. Do you even know how much your cat food is?" He tossed me in a plastic container with bars at the end, shutting it. "You're gonna stay in that for a while." I mewed at the bars, wanting to be let out. "And now I have to go and clean up your mess," he grumbled, moving away. I was kept in that box for at least a day. My water and food cups were put in there with me, making the small space even more cramped. I curled up in a ball in the back of the cage. I was starting to get very cramped. I might be tiny, but I still need space to run around. The boys were gone for their last day of school, and I decided to meow as loudly as possible so that the father who had stayed home might come over and let me out. It took forever, but finally he came over. "Can't you shut up?" "No," I mewed. He picked up the cage harshly, causing water to leap over the edges of the bowl. I hissed as it dampened my tail, and I quickly whipped it out of the way. I tried to dig my claws into the plastic as he carried me around in the stupid container. I heard the sound of a door opening, and I was placed inside something before he shut the door. He didn't come back for hours, by which time I had exhausted myself by mewling and crying, trying to get someone to save me from the scary dark. He got into the thing with me, sitting on a chair next to me. He was grinning as the thing I was in started to rumble and growl. We started to move, and I mewed in fright. "Just an hour, and I won't have to hear anything from you anymore," he groaned, pressing a button on the front, and loud music started to play. I cowered on the floor of the plastic, ears lying flat in displeasure. I didn't like the jolting and the bumping. There were sometimes sudden stops that would send water flying from my dish. It was getting to the point that there was nowhere dry to sit, and I was getting uncomfortable and angry. After forever, the car finally pulled over to a stop. His door opened, a few seconds of silence went by, and then my door was open. He spun the carrier so that it was flung against the wall before opening the bars. I tried to launch my entire 3 pounds of fury against him, teeth, claws, and everything, but he just caught me in his hand, shutting the door behind me. It wasn't entirely dark outside, the sun just peeking about round the clouds, and I would have thought that it was around maybe 5:45. Being an animal gave me a great sense of time. I could see a very large pond that went from one large building with columns on it to another. I could see a large white building reflected in the pond. The water was very clear, and the father picked me up, and I realized he was going to throw me in it. I quickly dug my claws into his hand. He hissed, shaking his hand. "Damn cat, get your claws out of me." "No, you motherfucker, I'm not going in that water," I mewed as loudly as possible. He pulled on my tail, pulling so hard I let go in pain. He held me by my tail so that I writhed, trying to get upright. To my dismay and panic, he launched me far into the air, and I flew. I mewed in terror until I plunged into the cold water of the lake. Chapter 3. The water was deep and scary, and I fought to make my way upwards. When my tiny head broke the surface, I let out a series of cries, hoping that someone would come and save me. I looked around wildly, trying to see how far it was to the edge. The thing that had transported me here was long gone. He wasn't going to save me. Not that I had expected he would. I kitty-paddled for a long, long time towards the edge. People were starting to appear, some of them running along the path around the lake. Idiots. They might fall in too. Humans weren't as sure-footed as cats were. I finally reached the edge, but looked up in dismay. It was a good foot above the water, and I had nothing to jump on. I shivered, my sopping fur soaked with coldness. I was freezing and I was scared. I just needed some body warmth and good pets. Some chicken would be nice too. "Help! Help! Help! Help!" I mewed over and over, paddling around. I was tired and hungry and cold. "Hey, Buck, did you hear that?" a curious, warm voice asked. "Help me, you dumbass! Can't you hear me?" I mewed loudly. "Yeah, it sounds like a cat," the second voice said. This voice was very warm as well, and I wanted them to find me. "But where is it?" the first voice asked. I could hear footsteps, and I continued to mew, even as I continued to feel even more tired. I couldn't give up now, not so close to being saved, not when I had to find Billy and Tommy and save them. What if their father tried to kill them too? Suddenly, feet appeared at the edge of the wall, and I looked up, trying to stay afloat. "Oh, the poor kitty," the second voice said, and a large hand dipped down, pulling me out of the water. "Gosh, she's so little," the first voice said in a marveling voice. He was a blond man with blue eyes and a kind face. "She must just be a kit," the second said. He was also kind-looking, but also a little scary. He had long brown hair, brown eyes, and a metal arm. Luckily, he was holding me with his flesh hand, which was very warm, and I curled up into a ball, trying to get as much warmth from it as possible. "Here," the second man said, "you can hold her in both of your hands so she can get warm. We should take her straight to the tower and warm her up." The first man took me into his large hands. They were huge, like the rest of his body, and very warm. He cut me between them, and they took back the way they had come. "Where are you guys going now?" a dark-skinned man said, stopping on his run. "Don't tell me you're done already." "No, sorry, we've got to cut the run short, Sam," the first man said. "We found this kitten in the water, and she's freezing. We're hoping maybe Tony will have something to warm her up, or something, I don't know." "Oh, well, she is adorable," Sam said. "I'll head back with you guys." The three men were very quick in bringing me to a very large tower that was very warm when they stepped inside. I was very content where I was, in the man's hands. They felt very safe and loving, and if it wasn't for the fact that I needed to find Billy and Tommy, I wouldn't have minded settling down with him. "Bucky? Steve? Sam? What are you guys doing back early?" a red-headed woman asked, sipping on a cup of what smelled like coffee. Since dark skin was Sam and dark-haired was Bucky, I assumed light-haired was Steve. "This little kitty was in the cold water of the reflecting pond," Bucky said, pointing to me in Steve's hands. "We want to get her checked out by Tony." "Does Tony know anything about animals?" the redhead asked skeptically. "You might want to bring her to Bruce instead." "Are they both down in the lab?" Sam asked. "Yeah, they should be. I don't know if Tony even went to sleep last night, though," the redhead said. "Thanks, Nat." "Nat? Was she a type of bug?" I looked at her with even more interest now. She didn't really look edible, though. We went into a small box that traveled downwards. I mewed, and Steve opened his hands a little. I got to my feet on his hands and stood up on my hind legs, putting my front paws on his chest. "Do you have food?" "Oh my gosh, she's so adorable," the man named Bucky squealed. Strange. He seemed like he would be scary. Maybe he was just an overgrown man-child. "I would like food," I said again. "She is adorable," Steve agreed. He ran 2 fingers down my head, lightly, like he was afraid to put too much pressure would break me. I purred. It felt good. I dug my claws into his shirt, crawling up it so that I could rest on his shoulder, wrapping my tail around his neck. I purred with content. "Oh gosh, please don't fall," Steve said in a pleading voice, resting one of his hands lightly on my body. 2 metal doors opened and they exited the metal box, walking down another hallway until they got to a very large room. It was filled with lots of metal things and tools. 2 men were sitting there. Both looked slightly similar. One was wearing glasses, wearing a light purple shirt that was buttoned at the elbow. His black hair was wavy, slightly looking a bit like Pepper. He was slightly shorter and slightly wider than the second man. The second was lean and maybe around the 5'7" mark. He was definitely shorter than the men carrying me, except maybe the dark man named Sam. He looked nice and friendly, with black hair around his mouth and on his chin. He wore a short shirt that had the letters AC/DC on it, and I wanted to let him know that he had 2 C's on his shirt. I was pretty sure it was supposed to say ABCD. "Is this the kitchen?" I asked. The lean man looked up first. "What are you doing with the kitten, Cap? I thought you liked dogs better." "Who is Cap?" Steve sighed, lifting me down from his shoulder to place me in front of the man. "But look how adorable she is, Tony." "So was his name Steve or Cap? What kind of name was Cap?" "Actually, I liked bottle caps. They were very fun to bat around." "Would he be fun to bat around?" "Where'd you get her from, and why are you bringing her down here?" Tony asked, putting a hand in front of me to stop me from batting whatever he was playing with off the table. "Holy, she's soft. And also wet and cold." I mewed happily with the compliment and sat still so that he could pet me. "She was in the reflecting pool. She was trying to get out of it, but the wall was too high," Steve said with a slight frown. "What the heck was she doing out there?" the second man questioned, joining in on the conversation. "Well, you see, there is this terrible man, and he threw me in there," I mewed. "You should arrest him or something, cat crimes and all. That's a thing, right?" "Oh my gosh, her mews are so cute," Tony mumbled. "We don't know," Bucky answered the second man's question. "So why is she down here?" the second man asked. "We were wondering if you guys had anything to check her out with, see if she is okay and all that," Steve said. "Oh yeah," Tony said, picking me up in his arms and then walking over to another table. "Stay still, cutie." He pressed a button and I peered at the green lasers in interest. My first reaction was to back away as they got closer, but the nice man named Tony had asked me to stay still, so I did. The green lights went through my body, but I felt nothing, and then Tony was picking me up and putting me back down on the other table. "Results? Perfectly healthy," a female said from literally nowhere. "Female." I hissed, my fur poofing up as I looked around the room, trying to find the source of the noise. "She's around 7 months old and is of the Munchkin cat variety. She will most likely only get to be anywhere from 3 to 6 inches bigger than she already is. She is pure white but has a small marking on her black right paw that is in the shape of a crown and is black. It seems to be natural. There is no imprints at least. She has no collar or identity, so it is impossible to locate her owners. However, with a few hours of time, I could possibly pull up the cameras from around the reflecting pool to see what happened." "That would be great. Thank you, Friday," Tony said. "Well, I guess that answers all your questions. Are you going to keep her?" "Yes," Bucky said cheerfully. "Me and Stevie were thinking about getting a pet, and she's obviously a gift." "What are you guys going to name her?" the second man asked with interest. "I don't know, Bruce. I don't want to call her anything generic like Marshmallow or Snow," Stevie said. "I know, Blizzard," Bucky said with a smile. "She kind of looks like one too, doesn't she? What was a blizzard?" "My name is—" "Insert your name," I mewed. "Blizzard is really cute," Tony said, petting me. His fingers felt really good, running along my fur. "Well, okay, it's not bad," I mewed sullenly. "Do you have food?" "She's very talkative, isn't she?" Sam asked. "Do cats usually mew a lot?" "What? Of course we do. We have a lot to say, you dummy," I meowed at him. "I wonder if she wants something specific," Steve said with worry. "Maybe she's hungry," Bruce said, rummaging through a drawer and brought me over something brown. "I don't know if she'll like this, though." I sniffed it and took a tentative bite. Ooh, it tasted good, almost sweet and chewy and soft. I liked it very much. "Bread?" Bucky's voice was very surprised. "Can kittens have bread?" "Well, until we get proper cat food, we're going to have to give her human food," Bruce said. "I would not give the cat sourdough bread, Mr. Banner," the robot voice said. "It contains a lot of yeast. They love it, but they get sick if they eat too much, and she's just a kit." 5 different hands reached out to snatch the tasty snack from me. I mewed in protest, leaping at Sam who had the bread in his hands. "So I would say that she is very hungry," Tony said, lifting me in his hands. I let out a cry, and I watched his heart break on his face. "She's so cute!" "Friday, what are some human foods that she can have?" Sam asked as he discarded the bread in the trash can. My eyes zeroed in on it, and when Tony put me back down on the table, I started looking for a way to get to it. Fish, chicken, beef, cheese, bananas, berries, melon, carrots, rice, pumpkin, oatmeal, eggs, and spinach, just to name a few. If you have anything specific, you can ask me, the thing they were calling Friday said. I crept low across the table, hopping down onto a stool, and then hopping to the floor, sauntering over to the trash can. We have plenty of cheese upstairs in the refrigerator. We also have hamburger, Tony said. Some of that should be good for her. I peeked into the can, seeing the delicious thing in there, and tried to grab it, falling into the bucket. I mewed as I latched onto the bread. Yummy! Where is she? Bucky asked. Blizzard, Steve shouted, a shadow falling over me, and he lifted me into the air. He attempted to tug the bread out of my mouth, but I dug my teeth in. Oh, come on, kitty, Steve pouted. I don't want to hurt you. Let go and you can have fish. Fish? What was fish? It was a funny word. Fish, fish, fishy fish. Come on, Blizzard, Bucky said. Give me the bad bread. It's not good for you. You'll get sick. You don't want to get sick. It feels bad. Reluctantly, I opened my mouth and let him take the bread from me. Good kitten, Bucky said, petting my head and tossing the delicious love of my life into the bin again. But alas, I did like Bucky calling me good. I liked all of them in here, although Bruce smelled a little funny. But Steve and Bucky were the most comforting of all, and Tony was a close second. Come on, let's go and get you some fish, Bucky said, taking me into his large hands, and they left the two men behind. Chapter 4. We were in a room that I recognized as a kitchen. It was much larger than the one at Tommy and Billy's home. It had more chairs and more appliances, a very large refrigerator, which was where yummy things were kept. It was filled with delicious smells, and the redhead from before was already cooking something that smelled good. What are you cooking today, Nat? Bucky asked as he put me down on the counter, going over to the big black box of coldness and pulling out something yellow. He set some of it down in front of me. I sniffed at it tentatively, biting into a small piece of it. It wasn't as good as the bread, but it had a nice, light taste to it, and I ate the rest of it before looking back up at Bucky. Now where is my fish I've been promised? Bucky just smiled at me, petting me. Steve, Sam, the girl named Nat, and another dark man were roaming the kitchen now, passing food out on plates. Bucky was setting down glasses filled with delicious milk. I patted over to one of the glasses when Steve turned his back, sticking my nose in it and started to lap it up. Aw, here, Blizzard, Steve said, getting a bowl and pouring the rest of my milk into it. He put the glass in the sink before grabbing another one to pour himself some milk. When do we get a cat? The black man asked. He didn't have much hair, but he seemed fit. I didn't like him much, though. He smelled like a black lab. Today, Bucky said, putting something from the stove onto a small plate and putting it in front of me. It was rich smelling, though very hot, and I decided to wait a moment. Was this fish? Is this fish? Nat made you some salmon. I hope you like it, Bucky said. So it's not fish? I asked. Does she even understand you? The black man asked. Sam laughed. Hey, Rhodes, we all know you talk to Ash like that. Who in their right mind named their kid Rhode? Tony and Bruce came up out of the lab to join us for breakfast. Bruce and Rhode had a conversation together while Tony sat next to me, petting me mostly while drinking a cup of coffee. I noticed that he got no food, and I graciously patted my plate so that some of my salmon sat in front of him. Want to share? I asked. Tony smiled a little. What kind of fish is this, Steve? Salmon, Steve replied. I think she likes it. Good, Tony said, scratching my head and eating a small piece of it. Have you gotten anything off the cameras yet? Bucky asked. He seemed very interested in what happened to me, and I was glad. I hoped that they could track down my owner so that they could find Billy and Tommy. I hoped they would protect them since I couldn't. Not yet. She's working on my main project right now, but she's hacking the cameras on the side. I should have the surveillance early tomorrow morning, and I'll let you know the minute she gets it, Tony said nonchalantly. Sounds fair, Sam said with a shrug. Good, so by tomorrow, they would see evil owner toss me into the cold lake. Then they would find evil man, and I would scratch him with my claws. What are we doing today? Bucky asked, picking up his dishes and putting them in the sink. Nothing, Tony said. Fury told us we have a 2-week break. I mean, you could probably do training if you want. I'm just going to head back down to the lab. See you at dinner, maybe. Tony, Nat scolded. You need to eat dinner. I just had some breakfast, Tony said, already leaving the kitchen. See you later. He's going to starve himself to death, Nat grumbled. That's what pepper is for, Sam laughed, also getting up from the table. I think I'm going to go and do a workout to make up for the run. You two coming? Sure, why not? Steve said, also getting up from the table. He scooped me up into his arms. You can come with us, Blizzard. I mewed softly, purring contentedly as I curled into his chest. He was so warm and firm and safe. I wondered if maybe Billy and Tommy could stay here so that I could stay with Steve and Bucky and Tony. We went into the moving metal box again, going down this time, before they went into a very large room with lots of metal things in it. There was a lot of metal in this building. There were padded benches and lots of metal bars holding big black circular things. There was also blue squishy mats on the floor, along with several black things hanging from the ceiling. I padded over to one of the blue mats, walked on it, and decided it was the perfect place for a nap. I sprawled across it and only opened one of my eyes when I heard Bucky start to laugh. "Guess we're going to have to find another place to spar, Sam. Blizzard took our mat." Sam chuckled. "Just keep an eye on her as we work out. I don't want to see her get stepped on or something. She's a sneaky little thing." I kept one eye open, watching as Steve and Sam faced each other on the mat. Bucky had his arms crossed over his chest as he watched their fists fly at each other, sometimes using their legs as well. I understood to a degree that they weren't trying to hurt each other. It was fighting without hurting each other somehow. But it reminded me of Mr. Peters and the way he treated Billy and Tommy. I hated it. When Sam knocked Steve on his back and raised his arm to punch him, I darted forward, leaping onto Steve's chest. I sat down firmly where Sam was going to punch, mewing loudly up at Sam. Sam froze, looking stunned, sitting back on his butt. "Wow," Bucky said, also sounding stunned. "She protected you, Stevie." "Aw, I wasn't going to hurt him," Sam said softly. "We're just practicing our sparring. It's fake fighting. No one was going to get hurt, okay, Blizz?" I mewed softly, starting to cry. I couldn't control my emotions very well. "Aw, Blizz," Steve said softly, sitting up and holding me in his hands. He gave me soothing pets, and my mule soon turned to content purring. I sat up on my hind legs, reaching so that I could lick his face with my tiny tongue. I was giving him kisses. Steve laughed fully, kissing the top of my head. "I'm okay. See, Blizz?" "She's an extremely smart cat, isn't she?" Bucky asked, but it didn't sound like he was praising me. He sounded concerned. I looked up at him, tilting my head. "Yeah," Sam said softly. "Do you think she saw abuse, and maybe that's why she reacted that way? Like she thought I was going to hit Steve, and she was trying to stop it?" "Friday said she was healthy, though," Steve said with a frown. "Wouldn't she have detected if the kitten was hurt?" "But maybe she didn't account for past hurts," Bucky asked. "Healed ones?" "I did, actually, Mr. Barnes," the robot voice in the ceiling said. "And?" Sam asked. "She had a few mild strains in her ribs and legs, but nothing serious. I did not think it was important at the time, as you were only concerned in her immediate health, not her past health. Her past strains, however, should not affect anything in the long run. They have mostly healed, and as long as she doesn't jump off anything high or get hurt, they will heal completely by the end of the week," the robot voice said. "Does this answer all of your questions?" "Do you know what possibly could have caused her strains?" Steve asked. "It is possible being kicked could have caused the ones to her ribs. Being dropped or thrown would also cause strains in the legs. However, the legs could also have been caused by her attempting to jump from a high place to a low place, putting too much strain on her legs. This could potentially affect the ribs as well, if done often." "Thank you, Friday. Could you please relay all of that information to Tony as well?" Bucky asked. "Yes, Mr. Barnes." "Alright, let's get back to sparring," Steve said, motioning to Sam. "Bucky, you could pet her. That might keep her calm." Bucky took me from Steve and went and sat on one of the benches. He let me lay in his lap, petting me from my head, down my back, to my tail. Repeat. I didn't freak out anymore after watching carefully the first few rounds. They truly didn't seem to be in any pain, and through some of it they even laughed. I knew laughing meant they were happy, which seemed to be the opposite of pain. Bucky switched out with Sam, but I didn't sit in Sam's lap. Instead, I explored underneath the benches, and I found a bottle cap to play with. Sam would flick it towards me, and I would bat it back at him. Sometimes we even played keep away, and I kept scratching his hand lightly, trying to get it. But he didn't seem to mind, just laughing and calling me cute, or saying good job whenever I got the bottle cap from him. "Well, you two look like you're having fun," Steve said with a grin as he and Bucky came back over. Both of them were dripping with sweat, but they smelled like nice spices and something else underneath that overpowering stench. "Think we'll go and hit the showers. Together?" Sam asked. Sounded like he was teasing him. "Of course," Bucky said, throwing his arms around Steve's shoulders. "What else would we do?" "Want to take the kitten with you?" Sam chuckled. "We should probably leave her in our room," Steve admitted. "Come on, Blizzard." I trotted after them as they made their way out of the training area. We went into the metal box for the 7th time today. I felt it vibrate under my paws, and I kept tapping the metal, wondering how thick it was. The metal doors opened once again, and I trotted after them once more. They made their way down a long hallway before opening one of the doors and letting me inside. Okay, Blizzard, we're going to take a shower. We'll be right back, Steve said, walking into another door. Bucky followed after him, and the door was shut lightly, a crack still there. It was a big room. There was a section with a nice sofa and a table, and one of those black boxes on the black wooden dresser. There was a door that was wide open, leading to a bedroom which had a very large bed in it. There was also a window. I jumped onto the chair before leaping onto the bed, and then leaping onto the windowsill. Wow, I said as I looked out over the city. I was very high up. I could see almost the whole city spread out below me. I could even see the strange white thing that I had seen in the water this morning. Wait, that had only been this morning? Boy, I was exhausted. I curled up in the windowsill, tucking my tail over my nose, and fell asleep. Chapter 5. You'll wake both of them up. A voice that I knew was Nat's hissed through the air. One of my ears twitched, and I opened one annoyed eye. I saw that Nat and Steve were standing in the doorway. Steve had his small black box in his hand. I noticed that I was laying completely on Bucky's chest, curled up into a ball. His metal hand was nice and refreshing on my fur. He was also fast asleep, his face slack and calm. I closed my eyes again, willing the not-sleeping people to go and bother other people. Wanda, Vision, and Clint are getting back from their mission today, Steve said softly. Are you going to go and greet them? I'll talk to Wanda and Viz later. I'd rather avoid Clint right now, Nat said, and she sounded hurt. He'll come around, Steve said softly. Trying to get rid of me? Nat asked, but she was teasing. Never, Steve said. Buck and I are always here for you, Nat. Well, till... Don't worry, I remember the terms, Stevie, Nat said softly. I won't break 'em. Nat was gone soon, and Steve went over, placing the black box on the dresser next to the bed. The movement of the bed was enough to make Bucky jolt awake. Nice nap, Dreamboat? Steve asked in a sweet voice. Never better, doll, Bucky grinned, and then I watched as they locked lips with each other. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, and I stayed silent. Bucky reached up with his hand, cupping Steve's face. I could see his pink tongue entering Steve's mouth. Very strange. Were they trying to eat each other? The scene in front of me sparked something inside of me, something familiar, something nostalgic, like I was older than I really was, but then it was gone. Must have been something from a dream. Feed me, I mewed, and the two of them broke apart, looking sheepish. Sorry, Blizzard, Steve said, picking me up. You must be hungry again. He brought me down the hallway towards what must be a private kitchen, because it was only the three of us, and it was much smaller than the kitchen we had been in before. He put me up on the kitchen counter, placing a small bowl in front of me, and found some delicious milk for me to drink, along with another bowl that had cool water in it. He also put some hamburger in front of me, cold, which was great. Aw, look at the little monster, Bucky cooed as I dug into the meat. She'd make a vicious killer, wouldn't she, Stevie? Steve rolled his eyes. Jerk. I drank some water and then proceeded to clean myself from head to toe after my meal. Bucky and Steve were sitting at the kitchen table, eating something that didn't smell appetizing at all. Ick. I decided I would like to join them on the table, and sized up the jump between the counter ledge and the table edge. I ran my paws over the kitchen counter, finding it slippery. I would have to take that into account as I jumped. I would not be able to run. I got as close to the edge of the counter as I could, sizing up the jump. I shrunk back on my hunches, readying myself for the jump. Steve moved his elbow out of the way, and I sprung. I'm flying, I mewed, my paws out to my sides. Bucky looked up and spit his milk out, which was disgusting, by the way, which made Steve turn, and his eyes widened. Suddenly, I face-planted into Steve's chest. I was stunned for a moment, and then looked up at him, sliding into his hands that were underneath me. Blizzard, are you okay? You can't just jump from the counter like that. You could get hurt, Steve said frantically, placing me down on the table in front of his plate. But Steve, I whined, I had that. Why'd you get in the way? Bucky chuckled. Well, she's an adventurous little kit, isn't she? He scratched behind my ears and I purred, walking towards him so that I could jump into his lap. I crawled up inside his shirt so that I could rest next to his warm body. I poked my head up over the top of his shirt and mewed softly. Don't move, Steve hissed. I want to get a picture. Well, hurry up, punk. Her tail is tickling me. I'm going to laugh, Bucky said, his voice sounding strained. I swished my tail back and forth faster, and Bucky started to heave. Steve quickly took his picture, and then Bucky burst out laughing. Oh my god, Blizz, you really are the most adorable kit on the planet. I mewed in agreement. That night at dinner, they went back up to the other kitchen with the other members of the group. There was another redhead who said her name was Wanda. She had glowy hands, and I didn't like them much, so I skirted around her a lot. Then there was a strange metallic man that they called Vision. I also didn't like him, but he didn't seem to pay much attention to me either. Then there was another man named Clint, who was only staying for dinner and then going back to a farm. I wondered what a farm was. I noticed that he and Nat sat on opposite sides of the table and never looked at each other. I sat next to Tony again, because everyone seemed worried that he didn't want to eat. So I kept patting my plate of beef over to him, looking up at him and meowing. "Is she a support cat or something?" Rode asked. "I don't know, but if she is, she's very good at her job," Tony said, petting me and then eating some of my food. Well, I guess I was sharing it, so it was our food. I decided that Steve, Bucky, and Tony were my favorites. I also liked Sam for the most part, and sort of Bruce. Everyone else was very iffy, and Rode was my least favorite because he most definitely had a dog. What was wrong with him? Once I ate my portion and drank some water, I curled up in Tony's lap, licking my paws. He continued to pet me, but I noticed when he petted me, he stopped eating. I stood up, climbing up his shirt to rest on his shoulder. "Eat," I commanded as firmly as I could, batting my paw at his ear. He smiled and must have been able to understand me because he ate another piece of hamburger. I licked his cheek in comfort and as a reward. Who wouldn't want to be licked by a cat as superior and cute as me? "Well, if that isn't a motivator to eat, I don't know what is," Tony muttered. Suddenly another woman entered the room. She was blonde, and she looked kind. I noticed Tony straightened up immediately. Rode, Wanda, Vision, Clint, and Nat had left by now, leaving me with Tony, Sam, Steve, and Bucky. "Oh, hey, Pepper, I didn't know you were coming over today," Tony said. "Do you want something to eat?" Pepper? Was this a house of weird names? What was wrong with these people's parents? Nat? Rode? Pepper? "No, but thank you. I just ate on the way here," the woman named Pepper said. She sat down next to Tony on the other side. "I see you're eating, though." "Pep, I always eat. Just usually where you guys don't see me," Tony muttered. "I know. I just worry about you," Pepper said, and Tony reached over to take her hand. "I know." "Who is she?" I asked. Pepper looked up at Tony's shoulder. "Tony? There's a cat on your shoulder." Tony reached up, picking me up to put me on the table so that Pepper could see me easier. "Yes, this is Blizzard. Cap and Tin Man found her in the reflecting pool early this morning on their run. They brought her home. She seems to like me." I mewed in agreement. "What was she doing in the reflecting pool?" Pepper asked in shock. "Cats normally avoid water, and the water had to be below 0°C today." "She might have fallen in, we're not sure yet," Tony said. "Friday said she'd pull up cameras around the reflecting pool by tomorrow morning. You know how hard it is to hack DC cameras. They're top security besides S.H.I.E.L.D. I didn't know what any of that meant, but I'm sure it meant hard. "How old is she?" Pepper asked, tentatively reaching out and petting me. I purred under her soft touch. Her touch was very different from the others. She had smaller hands with small, delicate fingers. She reminded me of Billy and Tommy's touch. "Friday said she's 7 months old," Tony said, "and that she has some light strains and fractures, so we have to make sure she doesn't jump off high heights," which, he glared at Steve and Bucky, "almost happened earlier today." "Hey, I caught her," Steve said, a defensive tone to his voice. He raised both of his hands, too. I settled down on the table, rolling onto my back, paws in the air. Bucky played with me, lowering his hand above me, and I batted his fingers away so he couldn't tickle my belly. This game kept both of us in trance for about 30 minutes. "What are you guys going to do when you find her owners?" Pepper asked. "I'll buy her," Tony said simply. "There's 1,000 cats in the world. They can buy another." "Couldn't you guys buy another?" Pepper asked, a small smile on her face. Yeah, but this one is smart," Tony said. "Besides," Bucky said in a gruff voice, "they clearly didn't take good enough care of her. She ended up in the pool this morning." "What was a pool?" "I'd ended up in a very small lake. Well, not that small." "Do you guys have any cat things for her, like a bed for her to sleep on?" Pepper asked, scratching my head again as I rolled over onto my stomach. "We were just going to let her sleep in our bed," Steve said sheepishly. "You'd probably roll over on her," Tony said, smiling a little. "No, they wouldn't. I plan on sleeping on their heads anyway." "Bucky has nice hair," I mewed. "It's almost like she's answering you guys," Pepper said with another smile. "Hey, are you staying the night?" Tony asked, looking straight at the blonde-haired woman. "Or do you have to be back in Cali tonight?" "Nope, I can stay for 2 weeks," Pepper said with a smile. I liked the way that Tony's brown eyes lit up in delight. "Great, that's wonderful. I promise I'll take more time out of the lab." Pepper laughed, and I really liked it. It was a very nice laugh, not too loud, and pleasant to listen to. "It's okay. If you get caught up in the lab, I'll just visit you there." Sam stood up from the table, stretching and yawning. Well, I'm heading off to bed. I'll see you guys in the morning. He petted my head as he walked past. Good night, Blizzard. Good night, nice black man, I mewed, stretching and yawning. I padded over to Bucky, putting my paws on his head. Can we go to bed? I'm tired. Carry me. Bucky laughed, lowering his head even more so that I could climb on top of it. Tony, Steve, and Pepper laughed at him. All right, come on, Buck, let's go to bed, Steve said, putting one of his hands on me so that Bucky could stand up without me falling off. They made their way back down the hallway, back into the metal box that they called an elevator, and then we were back in the room they had locked us in. I watched as they took their clothes off, leaving them in very tight black shorts with weird shapes poking out in the front of their pants. Come here, Blizz, Bucky said, picking me up off the ground, setting me on the bed. Steve sighed wistfully. I guess this means no fun tonight. Bucky chuckled, leaning over and touching his lips to his again. Once again, I felt a strange feeling in my stomach. I wasn't sure what that was, though. Maybe I'd eaten too much of that tasty bread. Don't worry. Once we get her a proper bed, we go back to having fun, Bucky said. His arms were around Steve, and he was very quick in dropping off to sleep. I watched as Steve put his arm up so he could rest his hand on Bucky's head. I love you, Buck. He looked down at me as I let out a tiny mew. Good night, Blizz. Chapter 6. My two new friends woke up at the crack of dawn, got dressed, and went out the door. They left it open a crack so that I could get out if I wanted to. I decided to continue to sleep lazily on their pillows, which were very nice and soft and terrible. I scratched at them a little bit, but they weren't really good for my claws. They just tore very easily. I would have to find something harder to scratch. An hour or so later, when they didn't come back, I leapt down from the bed and padded over to the litter box that wasn't there last night, and did my business, scraping more litter over my business before I hopped out of the box and padded out of the room. I found the metal box again and yowled. The doors seemed to slide open without any question, and I walked inside. I waited, and the doors closed and went down. They opened again, and I padded out and down a familiar hallway, finding myself in the kitchen. Hi, Blizzard, Sam said cheerfully, being the first to notice me. Hi, I mewed softly, leaning back on my haunches before launching myself up onto the bar stool and then leaping up onto the table. Well, damn, she's got some strong back legs, the man named Clint said. Munchkin cats can have unusually strong legs. She could jump from the floor to the top of the refrigerator in one bound when she reaches her full age, the robot voice said. All of the eyes in the kitchen just looked at me. Well, damn, Clint said again. What kind of name was Clint? Seriously, what was wrong with these people? I padded over to Pepper and asked, Where is Tony? Pepper petted me and said, I bet she's hungry. Do you guys have cat food? Not yet, Sam said, going into the coal box and pulling out some small strips of chicken and put a small bowl of milk down in front of me as well. Bruce reckons after we spoil her like this, she won't even eat cat food. He would be right. But they have things like canned tuna and other canned meats for cats, Pepper said. Maybe those will be good for her. We'll probably try them, Bruce said, down at the end of the table. He looked very tired. I wonder how much sleep he got. I also wondered how much sleep Tony got. Tony suddenly walked into the kitchen, and I noticed right away that he looked much better than yesterday. He looked like he had gotten lots and lots of sleep. He sat down next to Pepper. Well, you slept well, Pepper grinned, almost like they had a secret between the two of them. Well, I was just so exhausted after last night's activities, Tony murmured, leaning over and kissing her on the cheek. Not at the dinner table, Bruce said. Give me more details, Sam said with a grin. Shut up, Tony said defensively. Pepper just laughed kindly, getting up to grab more breakfast. I sniffed at the strange food when she sat back down. It seemed weedy, and there was something that smelled very sweet and sickly, like maple, maybe. Nope, you can't have these, Blizzard, Tony said, pushing me so that my paws slid across the slick counter so that I was away from Pepper's plate. Yes, I can. I do what I want, I mewed at him. I battered around my empty milk bowl, trying to knock it on its rim, and then see if I could run it off the table. I discovered that sometimes it would just roll in circles, and it was hard to knock off. I think she wants more milk, the man named Clint said, nodding towards me. I got the bowl to pop up on its rim, and I yowled in delight, starting to push it back with my paws. I could tell they were all watching me, based on the way I felt extremely self-aware. I batted it around for a bit, chasing it in complicated waving patterns before it reached the edge of the table. I twirled around, hitting it dramatically with my tail before spinning around again to watch it sail off the edge, and I waited in anticipation for it to smash along the wood. A metal hand reached out, placing it back on the table. No, No, why did you do that? I mewed sadly. It was going to make a spectacular crash. Aw, she's disappointed, Steve said with a grin. I'll let her bat one off the table, Sam said, smirking. Tony pays for everything anyways. One little broken bowl isn't going to do anything. Clint propped it back on the rim, but I batted it back down flat, mewing at him before stalking around it. I loved how they all watched me, smiling and amused. I liked being the center of attention here, though I didn't think I would want it to be that somewhere else. Maybe this place was a safe haven for cats. Maybe it could be a safe haven for Billy and Tommy, too. I didn't want them with anyone else. I placed a well-firm blow to the bowl, and it popped up on its rim. I ran it in circles before getting frustrated and batting it with all my might. It sailed into Rhodes' face as he had propped his head on his elbow. I mewed in laughter with everyone else. Tony clapped Rhodes on the back before lightly pushing the bowl back towards me. Rhodes rubbed his nose, but he was smiling, so I didn't think he was hurt too badly. I batted the bowl away from Bucky so he wouldn't grab it again, letting it sail off the edge with my tail again. I watched as it smashed across the wood, small white and blue shards streaking everywhere. I pranced on my paws, running and sliding across the tabletop, mewing with victory. Here, Blizzard, Steve said, giving me a bowl of water. I noticed, however, that this bowl was made of metal. I mewed in disappointment, knowing that metal bowls couldn't break. I lapped up the water anyways. Mr. Stark, I have the DC cameras ready for you, Robot Lady said. Oh great, just show them up here, will you? Tony said as the others started to clear the table. I should warn you that there will be signs of violence in the video, Robot Lady said in the same monotone voice. I've already locked down all of your suits, Mr. Rogers' shield, and Mr. Barnes' gun so that no damage can be done. You can't lock up my guns, Bucky protested while I wondered what a gun and shield was. Yes, I can, Mr. Barnes, Robot Lady said, and I frowned up at her. No. Bucky could do whatever he wanted. Bad Robot Lady for taking away his playthings. Show us the cameras, Clint said. We're all high in suspense now. Tony scooped me up into his arms so that the table was completely clear, and I watched as strange images seemed to show up in midair. They were fairly clear, and I recognized the car that I had been in. I watched Mr. Peters climb out of the car, walking around to get me out of my carrier. There wasn't any sound, but I watched with the others as I clung to his arm, trying to hang on for dear life. Bastard, Steve grunted when Mr. Peters finally grabbed me by the tail. Language, Clint said with a hint of amusement. Sam snickered. Bucky glared. I watched, not realizing just how high into the air he had flung me before I had plunged into the water. I started to lick the bottom of my paws in discomfort. I watched Mr. Peters get back into the car and drive away. I watched myself resurface, yakking and coughing, before attempting to swim over to the side and get out. I watched as Steve and Bucky came tearing up the walk, obviously out for what they called a run. I watched as Steve stopped first, calling to Bucky, and then they paused. I watched as they walked over, and Bucky pulled me out of the water, before passing me off to Steve. Then the cameras went off, and I finally took a time to look around at the others. Tony, Steve, and Bucky looked mutinous. I was sure that they would like to hurt Mr. Peters very badly, and I was looking forward to it. So it's official, Tony grunted. She's staying with us. Obviously, Bucky hissed, like we would send her back to live with that maniac. But I have to go back for Tommy and Billy, I mewed in protest. Can we charge him for anything? Bucky continued. Animal cruelty, Bucky spoke up. Tony, you could have Friday look him up and see if you guys could get anything more on him. Yes, do that Friday, Tony commanded. The robot lady named Friday pulled up more screens, showing both Mr. Peters and also Tommy and Billy's picture, along with a brown-haired lady I had never seen before. I mewed, prancing around, batting at Tommy and Billy's pictures. We need to save them. Anything in the files? Nat asked, sipping a cup of steaming coffee. Nothing really, Tony said, and he sounded frustrating. Wife is dead, died of cancer when the boys were 4. The boys are 7, almost 8 now. But there isn't much on them, although they don't have any hospital records other than their births. No broken arms or legs or sick checks, nothing. Cover up for physical abuse? Wanda piped up. She hadn't taken her eyes off the boys yet. I had honestly forgotten that she was even here, sitting next to the strange metal man named Vision. Possibly, Bruce assented with a nod. We could go ahead and check it out, Sam said. Just a couple of us go in, ask him about Blizzard, and then we can gauge his reactions with the boys and everything. Or stake it out, Nat said. Don't let him know the Avengers are knocking on his door. We can do an undercover spy mission. Whatever the case, we're going to need our weapons unlocked, Bucky said, calling up to the ceiling. Negative, Friday replied, and I hissed at her. You do not need a gun to ask a man a few questions. Don't be rash, Mr. Barnes. Is she like the mother of the group? I asked Bucky. He just petted me behind the ears. His metal fingers actually felt really good, almost as though they had been built to search out the good spots. I purred, rubbing against his hand. Fine, Bucky snapped. I don't need my guns to kill a man anyways. When should we go down? Steve asked, putting a calming hand on Bucky's shoulder, and I watched Bucky lean into Steve. I also watched as Nat looked down at her cup of coffee, squeezing it a little tighter. I also didn't miss the way that Clint looked awkward. Well, today seems as good as any, Pepper said softly. He doesn't live that far away. Not to mention you'll have to be down there in a few days, most likely anyways. I say we have an hour to get ready, and then we head down, Sam said. Wait, who all is coming with Steve, Barnes, and I? Tony asked with a frown. I frowned too. I only needed Steve, Bucky, and Tony. Maybe Sam and Pepper, but other than that, I'll go, Clint said with a shrug. Sounds like fun. And I'll definitely be going, Sam said, crossing his arms over his chest. And I, Nat said, though she sounded rather reluctant in her choice. You don't have to, I assured her. I'm more than fine with you staying here. All right then, Tony said, before turning to Pepper and having a quiet conversation with her. Come on, Blizz, Bucky said, scooping me off the table with one hand, putting me up on his shoulder. Let's go pack to kill. Chapter 7. I now sat patiently in the car that Bucky was driving. Sam was clutching onto the armrest in the passenger seat fiercely with every sharp turn that Bucky made. Steve, meanwhile, was sitting in the back with Tony, which made up the first group. I was snuggled under Steve's shirt as he attempted to read his book. He had a faint smile on his face, and he occasionally reached down, stroking the top of my head with 2 fingers. The car ride seemed very long, perhaps because the ride was very tense. I wasn't sure why it was so tense, but it was. I seemed to be the only relaxed cat in the car. Well, okay, so I was the only cat in the car. I digress. We soon pulled into a very familiar-looking town, and I popped my head even further out of Steve's shirt, batting him occasionally with my paw, and mewing at familiar spots I remembered. My favorite was the ice cream and donut shop. Tommy would get one very large donut with vanilla frosting on it, and I got to lick the remains off his fingers every time. I wasn't allowed to touch Billy's chocolate fingers for hours. Apparently it wasn't good for me. I still wanted to taste it. Maybe I could later. We pulled up to the curb of a familiar house, and I watched as they simply sat there. What are you doing? I mewed up at Steve. He just petted my head. How long are we watching the house for? Tony asked. It was the first time he had spoken since the trip. Apparently he was upset he wasn't allowed to drive, and Bucky was. I wasn't sure why he wanted to drive, though. It seemed like a lot of responsibility. Why would you watch a house? I asked Tony. A couple of hours, Sam said. It's a Saturday, so he doesn't have work. I wiggled out of Steve's shirt, leaping down onto the car floor before leaping up onto the island between the driver and passenger seat. I mewed. Bucky reached over, stroking me between the ears softly before he started messing with a small device in his hands. I peered over his shoulder, but everything was black and green and very hard to see. Sam had opened the window, and I leaped onto his lap before leaping out of the window. Blizzard! Bucky shouted behind me, and I could hear the doors of the cars slamming open. Other cars were zooming down the street, and I readied myself for a mad dash across the street. Seeing a fairly good opportunity, I dashed across the street, running as fast as my little paws would carry me. I heard cars honking and heard brakes squealing behind me as I made it up onto the sidewalk. A swift glance over my shoulder as I headed up the porch stairs showed me that the other 4 were following. The second car with Nat and Clint was just pulling up behind them, Clint shouting out the window at them. I scratched at the door ferociously and heard pounding feet inside. Billy opened the door, looking down, and he beamed when he saw me, scooping me up into his arms. Tommy, look! Snow is back! I liked Blizzard better, honestly. It made me feel chaotic. I looked up at his face, mewing. He had a large bruise bloomed out over his cheek, and I felt sad. Oh, wow, Billy whispered, looking at the people behind me. You brought the Avengers with you, Snow. Tommy appeared next, skittering to a stop, but much to my disappointment, Mr. Peters wasn't far behind, eyes glaring angrily as he took in the sight of me in Billy's hands. I hissed at him before leaping at him. I dug my claws into his face to the best of my ability before I felt the air get knocked out of me, and I landed harshly on the tiles. Snow! Billy and Tommy cried out together. Fucking cat, Mr. Peters spat. Oi! Bucky's voice said angrily from behind me. The hell did you hit her like that for? Maybe you didn't notice she lunged for my face, Mr. Peters said angrily. I watched as the anger dissipated from his face, turning into something like fear or apprehension. What do you want? We were trying to find Blizzard's owners, Steve said, and Billy and Tommy gaped at him. You're Captain America, Billy gasped. Steve smiled gently at them. How are you doing, boys? Great, Mr. Rogers, Tommy said shyly, eyes wide as saucers. Mr. Peters grunted. Tony faced him. We have some questions about how your kitten ended up an hour away from here. Bloody thing probably wandered away, he lied. You do know who we are, right? Bucky asked. I know you're a killer, and you ought to be locked up in the raft. Their father spat. Watch how you talk to my soulmate very carefully. Steve almost snarled at him. What was a soulmate? Was it a good thing? Well, probably. What Barnes was trying to say is you can't possibly think we came here without knowing who you were or how you got rid of your cat, Tony said. There are cameras all around the reflecting pool. He sighed. So I got rid of the cat, so what? You threw her into freezing cold water before the sun was even up, Tony snapped. That's what. Quick death, he shrugged. I honestly thought Bucky might lunge for his throat. I hissed at him. Why'd you want to get rid of her in the first place? She's a sweet little thing, Sam said, bending down and picking me up. Right. Well, maybe she hasn't made a mess of your house yet, their father snapped again. Came home to find the cushion shredded, the couch and chair shredded. She dug her nails into the wood on the stairs, knocked down the lamp, tore down the curtains. She's a demon. I can't keep cleaning up the messes she makes. Maybe you can pay a house cleaner, Mr. Billionaire, but I can't. I only have so many hours in the day, and most of them are spent working. We can't take care of a cat anymore. She's trouble, that one. She's a kitten. She's not even a year old yet, Steve frowned. What else were you expecting when you got her? I didn't get her. She was just dropped on our doorstep. My ears pricked up at this new information. I didn't really remember anything else, not even a mother or siblings. I just remembered one day Billy and Tommy were there, in this house. Maybe I just couldn't remember early memories. And even if you can't take care of her, that gives you no excuse to try and drown her, Bucky said angrily. What? Tony gasped. Father, Billy protested. How could you? Enough out of you two. Upstairs now, Mr. Peters snapped. I leapt out of Sam's arms, scampering up the steps, trying to push Billy and Tommy back downstairs and towards the door. Everyone noticed this action. I don't suppose there is a reason your cat wants your sons to leave your house? Nat asked. Good. She was useful for some things. He rubbed his eyes. How am I supposed to know? I don't speak cat. Where'd the bruises come from? Clint finally spoke up, his arms crossed over his chest. God, they're kids. Mr. Peters sounded exasperated. How am I supposed to know where all their bumps and cuts come from? I hissed at him. He ignored me. Are we done here? It's getting late, and I have work early tomorrow. Well, it's going to be really hard to work from a prison cell, Clint said. I have kids of my own. You think I can't tell the difference between a fist bruise and a falling bruise? We know the signs. I don't understand, Billy spoke up. What's going to happen to us? I have a friend, Nat said softly. Her name is Wanda. She really wants children, and she wants to adopt you. You live in Stark Tower with us, but mostly in her wing. She's also an Avenger, and she's married to a man, or robot, named Vision. Whoa, that's so cool, Tommy said softly. Scarlet Witch, Billy said excitedly. Whoa, I'm sorry. What now? Mr. Peters was extremely mad now. You cannot just take my kids from me with no proof of anything, rip our lives apart, and then decide who they go and live with. I've got a will. I have other relatives who are already supposed to be taking care of them if something happened to me. A police car pulled up in front of the house. Are you serious? He spat. Don't worry, they'll take great care of your kids, Nat said. Much better than you were. Tony was quick in explaining everything to the two officers, and they cuffed him right then and there. Neighbors had lined up the street to see what was happening. Mr. Peters was humiliated and angry as they let him out of the house. You kids want to go ahead and pack? Nat asked. We'll be leaving in a few minutes. Don't worry, we'll take care of everything from here. I leapt up into Tony's arms, snuggling into his chest as slumber started to overtake me. Tired, Blizzard? Tony asked. I mewed softly, letting my eyes fall shut. That's all right, I'll carry you. She likes you, Mr. Stark, Billy's voice said brightly. She ought to stay with you and Mr. Rogers and Mr. Barnes if you don't mind. You sure, kid? Tony asked. She was your cat first. Absolutely, sir. It's not like we won't see her again. Besides, maybe our new parents will let us get a dog now. Traitor, I said fondly to him, before falling asleep in very comfortable arms. Chapter 8. Billy and Tommy were greeted rather enthusiastically by Wanda and Vision. Wanda hugged them fiercely before leading them through the tower to show them where they would be staying. All four of them seemed very happy about the arrangement, which was nice. Meanwhile, Steve carried me back upstairs to their room, to which I watched as he and Bucky undressed and climbed into bed with each other. They made weird sounds from there, but they didn't bother me too much, so I gave myself a firm wash and then laid down for a cat nap. When I awoke again and padded down the empty hallway, the elevator doors opened the minute I reached them, and I was nearly stepped on by a black heel. I meowed loudly, dodging to the side, and looked up at the woman standing there. She had wavy blonde hair and plain features. She just glanced at me before heading down the hallway in the direction I had just come from. Humph. Stuck-up woman. Didn't even give me a pet. Once I reached the kitchen, I found it emptier than usual. Bucky was on some sort of device, Steve cooking at the stove. Sam, Clint, and Nat were nowhere in sight, and neither were Bruce, Pepper, Wanda, Vision, or Rode. It was just Bucky, Steve, and Tony today, apparently. "Hi, Blizzard," Tony said as I leaped up onto the table to join him. "I made you a little collar. Just in case of emergencies, you'll come back to us." He showed me the cute little pink collar studded with small gems around it. I wasn't entirely sure if it would be comfortable, but it was cute looking, so I was sure it was okay. "Okay, head up," Tony said softly. I lifted my head up and I felt him wrap the collar around my neck, fitting it perfectly. There was a small, strange, six-sided pointy shape that had the word Blizzard on it. "I like the snowflake," Bucky said, looking up from the device, before looking back down. "Thank you," Tony said, tugging slightly to make sure it was on or something. I was right. It wasn't too bad to wear. "Are those real diamonds?" Steve asked as he set down eggs and some strange, greasy-smelling meat. "Yes," Tony said. "What was a diamond?" Steve set a small saucer of milk in front of me. There was also some strange brown, round things in another bowl. They smelled dry and sort of like meat, but not good meat, like fake meat. "What the fuck is this?" I asked, tilting my head in confusion. Bucky burst out laughing. I knew she wouldn't like it. "Friday, please let Clint know he owes me $10. "Yes, Mr. Barnes," Friday replied. A piece of paper suddenly flew through a hole in the wall with lines over it. Bucky caught it, showed me that there was a 10 on each corner of the paper, and pocketed it. "Here you go, Blizzard. Would you rather have this?" Steve asked, putting a few scraps of normal chicken on the plate. I mewed happily, chewing on it immediately. "Oh well," Bucky said with a shrug. "It saves us money on the cat food, I guess. It costs more than the chicken, beef, and fish does anyways." "True," Tony said. I padded over to Bucky after my meal, looking at what he was doing. His computer was flashing with several colors as he jumped from a blue bus out of the sky. I was confused because it wasn't him. I looked at him. "How are you in the screen? What are you doing?" Bucky patted me on the head. "Fortnite made me a character, so now I'm playing the game. It's actually kind of fun." "They put me in the battle pass years ago," Tony yawned. "They made me into a shop character," Steve shrugged. Bucky rolled his eyes. "Yeah, I know. They've got almost all of us on there. I mean, is there anyone they don't have?" "Sam," Tony replied quickly. "Rhodey. I don't think they have Vision. They don't have the Wasp or Pietro." "Wait, Sam doesn't have a character yet?" Bucky asked, a huge grin coming out over his face. "Nope," Tony said. "Surprise, really, but maybe not." I put a paw on the laptop and felt warmth under my foot. After a few minutes, Bucky got a crown over his head, a grin on his real-life face. He stood up, moving back to the stove, and I put a second paw on the device. After a few seconds, I stood on the device. I tapped several keys with letters on them, listening to them click, before I settled down on the surface. It was very warm, and I purred loudly, enjoying the favorable warmth. "Aw, Blizzard, I was using that," Bucky pouted as he came back with a cup of apple juice and the strange puffy weedy things with syrup on them. "Eat, then play," Steve said, poking his fork at Bucky, "or you'll get the keys all sticky." I sniffed tentatively at the wheat treats before nipping at the food. "Oi, I don't think these are good for you," Bucky said, putting a hand between my face and the food. Well, that just made me want to eat it more. "Kittens can have small pieces of pancakes, but sparingly and only as treats," the robot lady said. "Hear that, Blizzard? Only as a treat," Bucky said, eating the pancakes as they were called in my face. I settled out as much as I could on his laptop, making both Tony and Steve chuckle. "She's definitely sassy," Tony said. "It's like she knows what we're saying," Steve smiled. "I do, though," I meowed. "Very clearly. Do you think I'm deaf?" "Anyways, no pancake for you," Bucky declared. I flopped over onto my side, taking up even more space than before. Bucky simply sighed and sipped his apple juice. "Hi, Blizzard, what are you up to?" Bruce asked as I trekked down to the lab a couple of weeks later. "Tony isn't here right now, if you're looking for him." Disappointed, I decided to let Tony know that I had been there by rubbing my chin and scent gland over his entire area before trotting back out of the lab. I found Pepper next, who was in a very large room with a clipboard in hand. "Hi, Blizzard," she said, squatting down so that she could pet me before standing up again. So much to plan. Tony and his short-notice parties. I wonder what a party was, and why Tony was having one. What's it for? Tony wants to officially show Billy and Tommy Peter as Billy and Tommy Maximoff, since Viz doesn't really have a last name. They're getting along really well together, just in case you were curious. They all say you can understand and everything. Anyways, they got a puppy and named him Sparky. I don't know, maybe the two of you could get along. Anyways, Tony loves his parties. It's technically not happening until next week, but with everything he wants, it's almost impossible. But it'll happen, just you wait and see. I wasn't really sure about everything she said. A lot of stuff was foreign to me. How could a cat get along with a mutt? Later that night, I found out that Steve had to leave on a mission and he was gone for a few hours when Bucky came back into the bedroom with Nat. My head popped up as Bucky threw her onto the bed, kissing her neck. Nat's arms were wrapped around his neck. What was he doing? That was his and Steve's thing. How dare he? What do you think you're doing with that Nat, teddy bear? I mewed, trying to jump up onto the bed. Unfortunately, they kicked the sheets and bed out so that it was lumpy and the landing was too uncertain for me to attempt to jump. They ignored me, undressing each other. I hissed and mewled, but they were even louder, and I was pissed. I couldn't even get out of the room to get someone and bring them here so that they could tell Steve that Bucky was being bad. I went back to my bed, angry, and something else I couldn't recognize. I settled down into my bed, my back to that disgusting Nat and mean Bucky. I would have to get Steve to find out. Steve was sweet, and I would not let his cinnamon heart get crushed. I knew that it was supposed to be him and Bucky. They were a duo, a pair, and now that disgusting red-haired Nat was getting in the way. I would make sure that Steve found out, no matter what I had to do. Chapter 9. Damn, what did you do, Bucky? Steve asked, blinking in surprise as I hissed at Bucky, swiping at him with a clawed paw. I turned my back on him, sauntering over and planting myself firmly in Steve's lap. I have no idea, Bucky said, sounding upset. Good. Steve had gotten back from the mission only 2 days after Bucky had been mean with Nat. I wasn't sure if there was a word for it, but if there was, that is what they did. I wish I knew it. I would spell it out on the keyboard, with my tail. I was very sad too, because I really longed for Bucky's warm hugs and sweet pets. He had that amazing metal arm too. But screw him, I was on Steve's side. Blizz, why are you mad at Bucky? Steve asked softly, putting me back on the table. I stared pointedly at Bucky and then at Nat, hissing at both of them. Then I turned my back on both of them. Since Steve wasn't going to let me sit in his lap, I settled for laying across Tony's arm. Tony woke with a start, petting me softly before laying his head back down on the cool tabletop. You gotta get some proper sleep, I mewed softly in his ear before giving him small licks. You're so cute, Blizz, Tony muttered sleepily, laying a hand on me before I'm pretty sure he fell asleep right there. I settled myself comfortably underneath his hand. Bucky suddenly burst out laughing. I've got it! Oh, she really is smart. Steve asked. Oh, you know why she's mad at you? Yeah, I'll tell you later. Nat should be there too. I should? Nat asked. Yep, Bucky seemed really pleased with himself and I was pissed. He was being so mean to Steve. He better not hurt Steve's feelings. Steve just shrugged, eating some more breakfast. How was the mission? Clint asked, coming into the kitchen at that moment. Nat decided that was her cue to leave as Clint took her seat. It was fine, Steve said with a shrug. I got the intel sent over to Fury and there weren't any problems. It was a quick in-and-out job. Nice, Clint said, nodding. He looked over at Tony. He passed out or did he fall asleep? I think he fell asleep, Bucky said. I think he passed out, Steve said, and then the two of them looked at each other. Bucky laughed and then leaned over into Steve. I wiggled out from underneath Tony's hand, leaping and clawing at Bucky to get him away from Steve. No, you made your choice, you idiot. You don't get to touch my Stevie. Mine. Fuck off, Tinhead. Tony had taught me lots of nice words. Bucky had the nerve to look amused, and my poor Stevie looked confused. Later was all Bucky said. Before later came, I dragged Tony by his pants leg up to his bedroom. I nudged him to the bed before curling up on his chest. He fell asleep quickly, and I plastered his face with lots of kisses before I left again. I also visited my litter box to take care of small business, and then decided to take a nap. However, before I could get a real nap in, Bucky came in. Despite my protests, he scooped me up, holding me tightly in his metal hand. Black and gold intertwined around my body. I couldn't really move at all. He carried me down to their private kitchen where Nat and Steve were both waiting. Bucky put me down on the island. "So why is she mad at you?" Steve asked. In answer, Bucky pulled Nat in for a huge kiss, right in front of Steve. I leapt to my paws, hissing at him. "See?" Bucky asked as he pulled away. "Natasha came to our room when you were on mission. You know, she's seen us be intimate several times before, so she must have thought I was cheating on you with Nat. So she's being loyal to you in response by being mean to me." I was confused now. Steve didn't seem upset. "Oh," Steve said, brows scrunching together, and then I yowled in surprise as he leaned forward, kissing Nat on the lips. Nat sat down when Steve pulled away and said, "Do you think we should try explaining it to her?" "I can't see it hurting. She's intelligent," Bucky said. "Okay," Steve said slowly. "So, Blizzard, in the human world, we have these things called soulmates. They come in the form of tattoos." He showed me a gun surrounded by roses on his shoulder. "This is Bucky. He's my soulmate. We both also have matching tattoos for a soulmate that we haven't met yet." He showed me a golden dagger surrounded by white flowers on his other arm. "Now, Natasha is a soulmate to Clint," Bucky said, picking up the story, and I switched my brown-eyed gaze to him. "But Clint has already married before they'd even met and had a few kids with Laura. Clint hasn't rejected or accepted Nat's bond, but that's where they stand. He won't initiate with her, however. So whenever I get lonely, Steve and James help me out," Natasha finished saying. So she wasn't a Nat at all. She was just Nat. So weird. But once their other soulmate comes along, I will stop seeing them, so they're not cheating on each other. I stared at them silently. "Since we're pretty open, we also help out one other woman," Steve admitted. "She hasn't met her other soulmate yet, but these are only temporary." They were silent for a moment. "Do you think she understood?" Bucky asked. I got up onto my paws. I felt upset for some reason. I didn't really understand everything they were saying. I didn't know how soulmates work, and I didn't understand why they would be with women who weren't their soulmates. Wouldn't their eventual soulmate feel bad about that? Or would they understand? Would they have been with other men or women too? But those questions were too complicated and tired for my little cat brain. And to be honest, I wasn't even really sure I cared. It wasn't really any of my business. See where jumping to conclusions had gotten me today? I padded over to Bucky and waited patiently till he dipped his head down and then gave him a few kisses. Bucky sighed in relief, petting me over the head. "I'm sorry, Blizzard. I didn't mean for you to get mad at me." "I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions," I apologized. Bucky got up, going over to the stove, and brought me back some pancake. "Here you go, Blizz." "I thought they were supposed to be for rewards only," Nat asked. "Shut up," I mewed. Steve just laughed. "Well, in this case, I think she deserves it. She'll always keep us honest, won't she, Buck?" "That she will, Steve," Bucky laughed as I ate the remaining pancake from his hand. "That she will." I had found a secret little hiding spot that I had decided to claim as mine. I had done all of the claiming rituals, including rubbing my chin on everything, using my scent glands, and pissing. It was mine. All mine. It was up on one of the highest floors of the tower. It was a fairly small balcony compared to the others, and filled with lots of flowers. It overlooked the harbor instead of the city, and I stared out into the vast blueness, wondering what it was exactly that was beyond there. I wondered if I would ever find out one day. Probably not. I was curled up into a tiny ball so that I wasn't blown away. The wind was very fierce up here, and sometimes I thought I might get whisked away. Maybe that's what those big white fluffs in the sky were. Other cats that had gotten swept away. But it was quiet up here and secluded. For some reason this felt familiar and right, and I was glad. So even if I did get swept up and become a white puffball in the sky, at least I had my hiding spot. Tony knew about my hiding spot, but whenever I was up here, he left me alone for the most part, unless dinner was ready, or if he knew it was going to rain. I think Sam and Clint knew about my hiding spot too, but neither of them ever bothered me, period. But Bucky and Steve didn't know where it was, and neither did anyone else, and for that, I was completely okay with it. Steve and Bucky had shared the bed with Nat a few more times, and I didn't like it. Even though it had been explained to me, and I mostly understood, I didn't like it. I felt possessive of them. They were mine, and no one else should have them. I only allowed each other because that felt right, but no one else should touch them. I usually left when they shared with Nat, going to find Tony and making sure he got some rest. Bruce said that ever since I had moved into the tower, Tony had gotten more sleep than he had in the past 3 years combined. I think that's sad. Sleep is some of the best stuff ever. I would do it all day, every day, if there weren't so many interesting things to explore here. And food. Apparently, Tony had these things called nightmares. I'm not sure what they are, but they sound unpleasant. That's why he doesn't like to sleep. I think that's sad. So I take care of him. He says he doesn't have nightmares when I sleep with him. Even with Pepper, he still has nightmares. I feel bad for both of them. Maybe I'll stay with Tony until Steve and Bucky's other soulmate gets here, and they stop frolicking around with other girls. I also often saw Billy and Tommy roaming the tower. They always said hello to me and gave me any treats that they had. Billy still let me lick vanilla frosting off his fingers. I still wasn't allowed to touch Tommy's chocolate fingers. But they also had a small brown puppy on their heels all the time. Like Pepper said, they named him Sparky, a stupid name in my opinion, and he was very chipper. There wasn't much overlap between dog and cat, so we have to speak the universal language of animals called ulimi, if we ever wanted to communicate with each other, which wasn't often. He seemed nice enough, though. He didn't chase me, seeming to understand that I was important to his new masters. Likewise, I didn't bother him much, because Billy and Tommy really liked him. I started to like Wanda and Vision a little more, just because of the way that Tommy and Billy seemed really happy. I had never seen them so happy before, except perhaps when they were playing with me. They called Wanda Mom, and they called Vision Dad. I wonder what their biological father would think of that, but I hadn't seen him since we'd taken Billy and Tommy away. The wind started to blow even harder in my hiding spot. "Come on, Blizzard, there's a storm blowing in," Tony's voice said from behind me. I didn't dare move, though, digging my claws into the wood so that I didn't go tumbling over the side. Tony was very quick in picking me up, pressing me close to his chest, bringing me inside. My fur went down after I was inside. "Thank you," I said. "Be careful," Tony murmured, putting me down on my feet so that I could go wherever I pleased. I trotted back to my place with Steve and Bucky, but judging by the sounds inside, Nat was visiting. I headed past the room, deciding I would find somewhere else to stay instead. Chapter 10. Blizzard? Tony's voice chastised me, and I opened one eye as I heard soft footsteps approaching where I was laying. I had decided to find Tony, but the lab had been completely empty, so I had hopped up on the counters, laying myself on the warmest surface that I could find. Tony had many warm surfaces in this place, which was very convenient for me. Tony was wearing a strange red metal suit, but his head was sticking out of it. I gotta use this computer, Blizzard. It's an emergency. I wondered what an emergency was. I also wondered what he was wearing. It looked good on him. His metal hands almost felt as good as Bucky's as he lifted me up, setting me aside. The big, thick metal fingers started to tap along quickly on the keyboard. I watched in interest as many things appeared on the screens above. "Okay," Tony muttered, hitting another couple keys. There was a white bar that quickly filled green several times before I settled back down on the counter, tucking my paws under my chin. "All right, we have a meeting with the pirate tomorrow," Tony muttered. "Lucky thing the party is tonight. Then I'll be hung over for the meeting and he won't have to listen to anything he says. Can't be that important." I had no idea what he was saying. I knew what a pirate was, though. Billy had dressed up as a pirate for Halloween. I liked Halloween. They gave me Swedish fish. They were exotic fish from Sweden, I think. They were sugary. Tony turned to me in the spinny chair. "I think you need a cute outfit for tonight. What do you think, Blizz?" "An outfit? Like clothing?" "I want to look like a princess," I mewed. I think I should make an animal translator," Tony said thoughtfully. "I'm thinking pink, though. Maybe a little tutu, and we'll definitely get you a tiny tiara." "I think sometimes you can understand me, and you're just pretending not to," I mewed, licking my tail casually. "Let's go shopping, Blizz," Tony said. I got to my paws and hopped up onto his shoulder. He was now wearing a black shirt with those letters AC/DC on it. I wondered where the metal suit had gone and why he had been wearing it. Maybe it was what they called a mission. I wondered if they were dangerous. Tony left the lab, pressing a button so that the lights went out, before he moved through the hallways and up into the metal box that I now knew was called an elevator. He pressed one of the glowy buttons, quickly moving backwards so that I couldn't light up the rest. "So I'm guessing Terminator and Capsicle are flaunting around with triple spy?" Tony asked up to me. Probably, I mewed, pretending like I didn't care. I wasn't sure why I cared, but I did. It bothered me even more than when I thought Bucky was cheating on Steve. Maybe because this was a clear, honest choice. Despite knowing it wasn't any of my business, I was still worried about their future soulmate and how they might take their relationship. Tony walked out of the tower and into the dimming sunlight. I believe that was probably around 4:36 in the afternoon. Tony walked over to where a nice black car was waiting. Tony opening the back door and sliding in. He placed me down in a strange contraption, strapping me in. "So you don't jump out," he explained before putting a strap over his own body. "Happy, we're going to the party store." "Of course you are, sir." But the man in the driver's seat smiled in the rearview mirror. "No lip, Happy," Tony said, but he was smiling too. I could tell that they were close in their relationship, despite their almost unfriendly tones. I tried my best to wiggle out of the straps, but they were very tight and secure. I glared at Tony. "Don't glare at me, sweetheart," he said. "I'm protecting you. You can come out of it when we get there. I don't want you jumping out any windows." So that's what this was about. I dug my own hole to sit in. It wasn't very comfortable. Eventually, we pulled up to a very large store with brightly colored words that spelled Party City. "I'll be back out soon," Tony said. "I'm only getting something for Blizzard." "Yes, sir," Happy said. Seriously, what was with these names? The Avengers must be a group of badly named people. The store was nice and warm compared to the cold February weather outside. Tony kept me in the thick front pocket of his jacket. I kept my paws on the edge, keeping my head above it. Lots of kids pointed at me, tugging on parents' hands. Tony himself seemed rather famous as people turned around and I caught snatches of people talking about him. Tony just sighed, continuing through the store until he reached one of the more secluded back corners of the store. It was quieter here, only an older woman with an ugly-ass poodle in her arms looking at different food-related costumes to stuff it into. I batted a cute princess outfit as Tony passed it and he paused in his walking, looking down at me. "You want that, Blizz? You would look really cute in this." I reached out for it with my paws, almost falling out of his coat pocket. I would have landed on my paws, naturally. Tony quickly put a hand on me so that I stayed in his coat pocket, before picking the outfit up. We went to the front counter where he paid for it, and took a picture with the male cashier for some reason, before we left back out to the car. "God, that was exhausting," he mumbled, walking swiftly up to the car where Happy was blasting some sort of music inside. Tony slid into the back seat. "Alright, Happy, McDonald's next. Let's get some cheeseburgers." "Right away, sir," Happy said, pulling out. I squished my ears flat against my head at the loud music. Not that it was unpleasant music when Tony played it low, but it hurt my ears when it was too loud. We pulled through a restaurant that smelled like heavily greased food. There was a big yellow M in the sky, but it was all curves and no corners, so I wasn't entirely sure it really was an M. Tony gave me a couple of what he called French fries, which were very salty and delicious, and I wanted more, but I couldn't have more because the stupid robot lady said too much was bad for me. It seemed that everything that tasted extremely good was bad for me. That was stupid. I think she just had a personal vendetta against me. I would get more French fries if it was the last thing I did. Well, maybe that sourdough bread too, and chocolate. Tony went back down to the lab before the party. I guess he had more work he wanted to do or something, and I tagged along. I didn't really have anything better to do except perhaps explore the ground level. But Tony didn't want me to go outside on the ground level without someone, and he was busy right now. I didn't really know where Steve or Bucky were, so all my fun options were out. I'd have to explore the grounds later. In the lab, Tony was looking through a large hole in the wall with a door in front of it. There were metal bars inside of it, and he was shifting through several clothes. "I keep my best suits down here so I can get ready in seconds," Tony said to me as he pulled out a black and slightly gray striped suit, pulling out a gold and blue striped tie to go with it. After he got dressed, looking very dashing and almost, well, how I assumed a father might look, maybe taking his daughter to a dance, he put on some weird but good-smelling gel in his hair, making it stick up. He slipped on fancy shoes that I rubbed my chin against but didn't dare put my claws to use on. Then he picked me up, putting me on the table, and grabbed the party package. He opened it up, pulling out the very small pink outfit. "Okay, Blizz, you're going to have to be patient with me. Try not to struggle too much, alright?" Tony asked. He picked up my back legs, carefully wiggling the dress onto me. I tried to hold still to the best of my ability, almost feeling giddy that I was going to look so pretty. He put my back paws down slowly, pulling me up carefully so that I was standing on my back legs to pull the rest up over my front two paws. It was slightly tight, but I was able to move well with my paws, and nothing got in the way. "Okay, I don't really know if this will stay on well, but we can still try it out," he said, picking up a very tiny silver tiara between his thumb and pointer finger. I stayed still as he arranged the crown around my ears. Tony grinned, pulling out a black box. "Stay still, Blizz. I want to take a picture." I held still until he moved the picture taker away, putting it back in his pocket. Tony hummed as he sat behind the desk, tapping away at the computer. I stood by his elbow, placing my front paws on his arm, trying to see what he was doing. "Just sending the pictures out to the other Avengers," he said, "even though they'll get to see you at the party." "Why are we having a party again? I forget," I asked. "Anyways, we probably shouldn't be too late. You're important to Billy and Tommy after all, and since the party is about them, you should be there early. Sparky's going to be there too, I think. They should keep him on a leash, but you'll be free range," Tony said, carefully picking me up so that I could rest my front paws on his shoulder. His hand supported my bottom legs. "Didn't you throw this party?" I asked. "Why don't you want to go?" "You throw too many parties," Tony muttered. "I used to like them, you know. But now I've got Pepper, and I really don't want to party too much anymore. I'm trying to stave off alcohol. You'll help me out, right, Blizz?" I muted in agreement as he stepped into the elevator. Whatever alcohol was. 17th floor, Friday," Tony said. "Yes, Mr. Stark." The elevator went up, and Tony seemed to stand up just a little straighter, like he was putting on a show for others. The elevator doors opened, and I too tried to look more professional, or whatever. I didn't want to embarrass him. I only wanted to help him. "Here we go," Tony murmured. Chapter 11. Tony greeted several people as he entered. I wasn't entirely sure what a party was supposed to be like, but it wasn't entirely what I thought it was. By my head count, there were about 130 people. Some had large cameras and microphones in their hands. They kept commenting on Tommy and Billy, or sometimes they called them the Avenger twins, or other names I didn't understand. They were told to stay behind certain lines and could only mingle with the actual party if they left their cameras and microphones behind. Everyone was wearing either suits or sparkly dresses. Pepper was wearing a gorgeous green gown, greeting Tony with a kiss on both cheeks before rubbing my head a little. Tony seemed to steer away from the bar, greeting people while staying next to Pepper. They seemed to be a tight duo, which meant that they were going to stay by each other's sides all night. I followed behind Tony proudly, tail and head held high. Tony introduced me often, and lots of people gave me either poor, adequate, or great scratches. I accepted all of them, though, loving the feeling of fingers roaming through my fur, gentle scratches against my sides. It felt good, no matter the touch. Billy and Tommy were there as well, though I didn't get to see them for the first half-hour or so of the event. They had Sparky on a yellow leash around their feet. He was laying at their feet, wagging his tail excitedly, and giving small barks of thanks to the people who petted them. When I finally made my way around to them, Billy picked me up, showing me off to the people who came up to greet them. From what I could tell, it was mostly made up of the other, less-known Avengers who didn't live in the tower, and then people who called themselves S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. Tony kept muttering something about being thankful that Eye Patch wasn't here because he would be a mood killer. I wondered what kind of name was Eye Patch, or maybe it was just a nickname that Tony had given the Nameless Man. I actually couldn't wait to meet him. He sounded like fun. I wondered if he liked cats. If not, I could always scratch his eyes out. Steve and Bucky were late to the party, and after overhearing Sam talking to Clint, I was made aware that neither of them wanted to come to the party in the first place. Apparently they hated parties. I wasn't sure why. I was enjoying myself immensely. Bruce was sitting at the bar, talking to Natasha. He looked rather lost in thought as he swirled his drink in his hand. He and Nat chatted casually about lots of things, although occasionally he dipped into something science-y that she tried her hardest to follow along to. I noticed that Clint was having a hard time keeping his eyes off Nat, though he made sure that he was never looking at her when she was looking at him. I wondered why he would marry someone that wasn't his soulmate in the first place. Eventually you would find your soulmate, right? So why risk getting married to someone that wasn't? I sat up on the bar, drinking a bowl of milk that Sam had grabbed me when I patted over to him and mewed several times. Originally I had just been asking what made a party, because on TV there were usually more people than this. Or maybe the spaces were just smaller in the movies, so it looked more crowded than it was, if it was in a large space, like this one. But Sam had just assumed I needed something, and I hadn't turned aside the lovely bowl of milk that had come along with his words. I saw Pepper standing by herself now, and I was a bit confused about where Tony was when he sat down next to me. He huffed out a breath. "Hey, Blizz." "Are you okay?" I asked, batting his shoulder gently. Tony looked down at me before scratching my head. "You know, I can't even stand by Pepper's side the entire evening. She's the owner of Stark Industries now, and she's got to do some of the stuff on her own. Plus the reactor is acting up again, so it gets a little hard to breathe. But I'll be fine. I always am." I looked between where he looked sad on the bar stool, pointedly not looking towards the alcohol on the other side. His glass was filled with Sprite and a few cherries and syrup in it. He called it a Shirley Temple. He was also slightly rubbing his chest, where I knew the blue glowy thing resided. I wasn't entirely sure what it was for, or what he did, but it was making him tired. Maybe he should consider getting it out of him so he no longer hurt. Pepper was standing roughly 20 feet away or so. She was talking to 3 men, all of them in business suits, and had drinks of whiskey in their hands. I wasn't sure what they were doing at Tommy and Billy's party, but maybe I had misunderstood the entirety of the party. I pawed at Tony again, and when he finally looked at me, I lowered my head. He kissed the top of my head, and I licked his cheek and mewed, "I will give your love to Pepper now." I scampered down from the bar stool, trotting over quickly to where Pepper was standing, wearing her beautiful green dress. I batted at her leg. She looked down but didn't touch me or lift me up so I could give her Tony's kiss. I batted her again, and I frowned when she stepped away a little. Maybe she couldn't bend down and pick me up because she was talking to the men. After all, I was sure she couldn't talk from the floor. I decided the solution was to get up onto her shoulder. Since there was nothing around, I would just use the nice dress and climb up it carefully and settle on her shoulder. Then I would touch my forehead where Tony had kissed me to her cheek to give her Tony's kiss since he wasn't feeling well enough to do it himself. I unsheathed my claws and started to scamper upwards, like I usually did on any other day with any of them. "Blizzard, Blizzard, no!" Pepper shouted, and I suddenly felt myself being dislodged from the cloth. I suddenly hit the floor hard, sprawling across it. I laid there for a second, disoriented before I got my paws, shaking myself. I looked up and saw that Pepper had stepped backwards and that she had several rips in her dress. She was using one hand to hold up part of the dress so it didn't slip downwards. "Pepper!" Tony struggled over to her, trying to present himself as though he wasn't having a hard time with breathing. "Come on, we can go upstairs and—" "Why would she do that?" Pepper fumed. "Look at the dress." She was angry with me? I slinked backwards, hiding between the legs of the bar stool. Almost the entire crowd was looking at her or at me, and I hated the attention. "Blizzard, don't make any more trouble," Tony called over his shoulder as he led Pepper out of the room. I slunk back even further. Trouble? Suddenly, her dress was starting to look a lot like the drapes of the curtains that I had knocked down in Mr. Peters' house. Would they send me away too? Billy and Tommy ran by, Sparky on their heels. They didn't even notice me cowering under the chair, running up to Wanda and Vision. Vision lifted Tommy into his arms, giving him a kiss on the forehead. Billy yawned. Suddenly, it felt cold, like the entire world had turned against me. I skirted around the edges, nudging open a half-open door to slip through, finding myself in a room that was made up completely of Avengers. Bucky and Steve were sitting next to each other on the couch, wrapped in each other's arms. Clint was sitting in an armchair. Bruce was sitting on the arm of a chair that Natasha occupied. A man named Stephen Strange was sitting on air. Sam was sitting on the floor next to the couch. There was also Scott, Hope, and several others that I didn't know the names to. They had a bottle on the table, laying in its side. At the moment it was spinning until it landed on Bruce. Bruce blushed, but he leaned over, kissing Nat on the lips. I was confused, but I figured it must be some sort of game. "Alright, I think that's the last one. We can move on to Truth and Dare now," Rhodes said. I watched from the corner as they asked each other truth or dare. I listened as they either answered questions and laughed if they picked truth, or watched as they did stupid or sexual things if they picked dare. I noticed as I went to clean myself, on habit, that my dress had small dirt stains on it, and I felt sad. I guess that was stupid, but I'd actually really liked my outfit. Suddenly there was a shrill laugh that made my ears hurt. I winced and looked up to see the same blonde lady that had almost stepped on me went ahead and sat down on Steve's lap, kissing him. I hissed. I mean, yes. They had told me that they had another lady they served, but I still hated it. I hated it as much as when they were with Natasha. I was possessive of them, and I was possessive of their future soulmate. Well, no, that wasn't entirely true. I was possessive, I knew that, but I wasn't hurting when I watched them. I was hurting when I saw Tony and Pepper, or Wanda and Vision. Did I want a partner? A male cat to be in love with? Did things even work like that for me? I was just barely a year old yet. Steve and Bucky stood up, and the blonde wrapped her legs around Bucky's waist. "James," she laughed. "Hold on, Sharon, we're going to have a rough night tonight," Bucky laughed. "Don't forget protection," Clint and Scott yelled after the three of them. They didn't notice me. I padded out of the room, realizing I hated parties. I made my way up to an abandoned floor. I knew that they only used this floor for meetings, and there would be no meetings tonight. One of the doors to one of the conference rooms was already open. I padded inside and stood on the white carpet. The room was rather bland. There was a long table in the middle of the room, with several spinny chairs arranged around it. There was a monitor where the robot lady projected images and other things onto it. There was a bookcase in the back room. 3 of the 4 corners had potted plants, and there were some small plants on top of the bookcase. There was only one on the table. There was also a computer on the table, the kind that was somewhat small, the kind that I could sit on and it would warm me up. I didn't jump up there right away. I suddenly felt very, very sad. I started to claw at the dress, and soon pink scraps were all that was left, scattered around my paws. Only then did I jump on the table. I dislodged the crown from behind my ears, and the small piece of metal clinked, falling onto the table, rolling across the wood, falling off the edge, and rolling under the table. I started to mew, soft cries emitting from me. Water dripped down my cheek fur as I settled myself down on the warm laptop. "Are you all right, Blizzard?" Robot Lady asked me nicely. "You seem to be sad and distressed." "It's not like you can understand me," I cried. "No one can. I'm lonely. I'm tired." "I will contact Mr. Stark and the others, so that they are alerted of your distress," Robot Lady continued. I curled up tightly on the laptop. It was very nice and warm, and I could already feel myself drifting away. My white fur was now stiff with dried tears. I didn't even know I could cry. I had always wondered why humans cried, but now I felt better actually, like I had cleansed myself internally. So maybe crying had a benefit to it. I wasn't exactly happy, and I was still sad, but it felt different. It felt better. I heard heavy footsteps coming down the hallway. They weren't Steve's or Bucky's or Tony's. Actually, I wasn't entirely sure whose they were. My assumption was they belonged to the owner of the laptop. I guess my warmth was short-lived. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and I opened my eyes. Farther down the hallway, I could hear the elevator doors opening. In front of me stood a tall, brown man. He wore something black over his eye, and he wore black clothes. Upon seeing me, he slipped a gun into his hand. Now that the elevator doors had closed and this man had stopped walking, I could pick apart several of the different Avengers' footsteps. More than just one Friday had alerted had come. Perhaps then they had not come for me. This must be Eye Patch. They were here for him, not me. Eye Patch lifted the gun even higher until it was level with me. I stared back at him coolly. I wondered what a gun did. I knew Bucky had one, so it couldn't be a bad thing. Tony was the first one I saw again, looking both exhausted and frustrated. I watched his eyes widen at the sight in front of him. Then Eye Patch pulled the trigger. Chapter 12. I stood up on my paws, watching a fast metal thing come towards me, almost slowly. I watched as Tony lunged forward, grabbing Eye Patch's arm, jerking it sideways. The other Avengers pushed past them, filing the room. I felt my fur puff up as the metal thing came too close to my body. A blue energy emitted from my body, and the bullet disintegrated into dust particles. I hissed, getting to my feet. Now I wasn't just sad, lonely, and tired. I was getting pissed off and full of rage. Who did this man think he was? What had he been trying to do to me? "What the hell, Fury?" Bucky asked, coming over to pick me up. I hissed at him, backing away. Tony was looking at the ground before bending down to pick up the princess scraps. He looked almost hurt. I didn't know why. "Blizzard, it's okay," Steve said gently. "We have to take her in," the man that Bucky called Fury and Tony called Eye Patch said, striding towards me. "For what?" Bucky asked defensively. "Tests. Maybe you were blind, Mr. Barnes, but she just emitted a blue energy from her body and disintegrated a bullet. Aren't you curious to know what she is and why she's here? Fury asked. None of them answered. My fur was standing on end. She's a kitten, Tony said softly. Is she really? Fury scoffed. Because the last time I saw a cat with supernatural powers, I lost an eye. So excuse me if I want to bring her in for testing. What was testing? We can do all of that here, Tony said. Pardon me for the harsh assumption, but I don't think you could actually put her through the test, Mr. Stark, Fury said, his hands behind his back. The gun was back in his holster. Maybe I should run away. Maybe that would solve everything for everyone, including myself. I leapt down from the table, scampering straight for the door. Quicker than I could have anticipated, the pirate man had kicked the door shut. I skidded to a stop, smashing into the door, and tumbled backwards. I quickly scampered to my feet before the man picked me up in his hands. You came prepared, Bruce noted as Fury carried me over to the table. Sharon warned me there was a cat in the building. Of course I came prepared, Fury said. He didn't let me go, and I couldn't see what they were talking about. Not to mention, Romanoff warned me that there was a spy in the building. You all know this. The information given to us correlates with the same time you got the cat. You think the cat is a spy? Clint asked incredulously, and Tony scoffed. Has she shown any signs of intelligence? Any signs that she could understand more than you think a kitten can? Yes, Pepper said, speaking up now. She had only just come down now wearing a white dress that didn't pass her knees. When she thought James was cheating on Steve with Natasha, she was mean to Bucky until they told her about soulmates. Fury gave the others a pointed look. Human intelligence in a cat. She is not the spy, Steve said with a frown. You wouldn't understand, Fury said. You weren't there before. A cat with human intelligence or supernatural powers isn't a cat at all. Instead, they are what the Skrulls call flurkins. She has shown both supernatural powers and human intelligence. You can't pretend you're not interested in what is wrong with her. There was something wrong with me? Was that why I kept making people mad at me? I struggled in his hand again, wanting my paws on the ground. His grip was firm and tight, though not to the point of hurting. He squeezed me a little in his hand, and I let out a pitiful mew. Put her down, Bucky and Tony commanded together. I do not have time for this, Fury sighed, moving again. I'm taking her to S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, where they will run some tests on her. For how long? Steve asked. As long as it takes, Mr. Rogers, Fury said in a tone that sounded rather patronizing. I heard the sound of plastic being set down on the table and the sound of metal hinges swinging open. Suddenly I was turned and found myself face to face with a carrier identical to the one Mr. Peters had put me in before he tried to kill me. No! I yelled, throwing my paws out as wide as I could, hoping to catch them on the sides of the door so I wouldn't be put in it. My claws barely scraped the edges, and I was placed into the carrier. I ran for the entrance, scrambling on the plastic, but the metal gate thing came in front of it. No, please, I begged as loudly as possible, clawing at the gate. I'm sorry. Please, I won't do anything anymore. I promise. Don't let him take me away. Stop, Bucky said, moving for the carrier, which Fury swung out of the way, sending me against the wall. She's in pain. You need to let her go. Mr. Barnes, this isn't permanent, Fury said, starting to walk towards the door. No, I don't want to die. Why are you letting him take me? Tony, Bucky, Steve. Please, I'll be good. I won't rip any more dresses. I'll be quiet. My mews echoed down the hallway as Fury exited the room. I could hear Bucky roaring in frustration from the other room, and then Tony's fast footsteps came down the hallway. Fury! The elevator door closed in front of his face. I shivered and trembled, backing up into the farthest corner of the carrier as I could get. I was scared. I didn't want to die. Put her in here, the frustrated and exhausted voice of Fury said. The carrier door was open, and I scampered out immediately, looking for the door to get out of here, but I couldn't find it. I skidded to a stop before rushing over to a corner and huddling in it. Everything was white, the floor, the ceiling, the walls, and I supposed even the door was white. There was a shiny mirror that showed me in the rest of the room on the front wall where the two men were standing, Fury holding the carrier in one hand. There were two small metal bowls, one filled with water and the other had chicken in it. There was a standard gray and white bed next to the bowls. Sir, the second man asked as he stood up, why are we treating the cat like a prisoner? You wouldn't understand. I have my reasons, Fury said, leaving the room. Someone will be here to get you tomorrow, the second man said before following Fury out of the room. The door shut behind them, and I could only just make out the outline now. Did that mean Tony or Steve or Bucky would be here soon? But why would they come and get me if I had just gotten here? I was terrified, my fur puffed up like a fluffy shield around my body. I wondered what that blue stuff was and if I could get it so that no one could touch me unless I wanted them to. Maybe I could turn people into dust. I waited, and waited, and waited. Finally, I think I dozed off. But when I was aware of my surroundings again, I waited some more. I wasn't entirely sure how long I waited. My natural clock was off without seeing the sun. The lights were never off. Finally, the door opened and a man wearing a strange white outfit that covered all of him came in. He had another carrier in his hands, and I pressed myself as far back into the corner of the wall as I could. He approached me with slow but careful steps, almost as if he didn't want to startle me. Once he was close, I bolted, darting between his heavy legs and rushing towards the door. The moment I reached the entrance, there was an electrifying pain, making my fur shoot upwards and fizz. I slumped onto my side, shaking and trembling. It hurt. I had never hurt so badly before. "It's okay, kitty," the man said, picking me up with one hand and sliding me into the carrier. I closed my eyes, not wanting to see the dreadful plastic inside. How was it that just yesterday I had been shopping for a princess dress with Tony? A princess dress that was now in scraps of fabric because I had gotten angry at him. No, not angry. He had made me sad. Bucky and Steve had made me even sadder. But now I just wanted to cuddle into their arms and let them give me nice pets. Unless they hadn't stopped Fury. Not really. I had seen them fight. They could have done that, which meant that deep inside they were okay with getting rid of me. A tear streamed down my fur. I was tired. So tired. The carrier was placed down on a table, and the carrier door was opened. I just stared at the opening, and eventually 2 hands reached in, pulling me out. "What sort of test does the director want us to run?" a young male voice asked, and an older female. They were also dressed in a strange white suits. Everything smelled very strange, like clean, but a poison sort of clean, a chemical sort of clean. "Defensive tests. Apparently he shot a bullet at her when her powers showed. He said to start with some less harmless tests first until we can figure out her power trigger, and also some intelligence tests with small electrical shocks," the woman said, putting together a piece of paper on the clipboard. "She's so tiny, though," the man frowned. "Are we sure she can handle all of that?" "Well, if she's magical, she can," the woman said. "What are we going to start with, then?" "Here," the woman said, handing him something. You want me to throw it at her?" the man asked, sounding surprised. The woman just stared at him, a pencil poised over the clipboard, waiting for something. He hesitated, and then launched something bright orange at me. It thunked against my forehead, making me cry out, staggering backwards onto my back legs, falling over. "Shit," the man cried out, and through my bleary gaze I saw him rush towards me. "Are you okay? Are you sure she has powers?" "Fury said she did," the woman asked, biting her bottom lip. "Try again." The young man stared at her in shock before resigning himself to picking up the orange ball again. He headed back to where he had been standing before, throwing the ball at me again. I tried to make some sort of shield appear, trying to protect myself from the hurt that I was going to feel again, but nothing happened. The ball slammed into my nose, making me cry out and stagger again. The young man and older woman exchanged a glance. The woman shook her head, putting the clipboard down. "Give her the intelligence test. I'm going to contact the director." "Yes, doctor," he replied quickly, putting the ball down on the desk and grabbing some other things. He laid out several blocks in front of me. They were all a brown color, but they were in different shapes. Some had round shapes, some had 4 corners, some had 3, some had more than that. He then put a small, almost collar around my ankle, which had several wires attached to it, and those wires were attached to a box. I was now aware that I was no longer wearing Tony's collar anymore. I missed it. He picked up a circular piece and said, "Circle." He picked up a strange pointy shape and said, "Star." He picked up 2 different blocks. In one hand, he held it closer to me and said, "Rectangle." Then he pulled that one backwards, pushing the second one closer to me and said, "Square." Another block was picked up, triangle, and another, pentagon, octagon, hexagon. He moved the shapes around and then said, "Which one is the rectangle?" I patted over carefully to them. My head and nose throbbed, and I was close to crying again. I batted the one he had called a rectangle with my paw. He let out an audible sigh of relief. Triangle. I pointed to it. This continued on for a few rounds before he moved on to other things. Small pretend animals that I had to pick out. He even put a keyboard on the computer and asked me to spell out certain words. That was a bit difficult, but I did my best. I had done all of the intelligence tests by the time the older woman got back. The man never used the wires, even when I got a couple of things wrong. He only told me what I got wrong, and then told me what the correct option was. She passed intelligence tests with flying colors, he said, handing the clipboard to her. What did Director Fury say regarding the physical? To keep trying, the woman said glumly. Maybe try and find something softer than the ball. But he warned me that if we can't get it out with simple harmless objects, he's going to pull out the gun again. God, the boy muttered. You can take her back to her room, the woman sighed. We'll do it tomorrow, after she's had something to eat. According to the scans, there's nothing in her stomach right now. Are they even feeding her? The boy muttered under his breath so that she didn't hear him. He picked me up and tried putting me back in the carrier. I put up a hissy fit, but I was roughly shoved in there, and the door was closed. I'm sorry, Kitty, but I gotta put you in there to take you back to your room. It's not my room, I mewed, slumping over onto my side and closing my eyes. My nose hurt so badly. It was still throbbing. The walk seemed longer the second time, and then I was released into the right room. I decided I hated the room. I hated my fur. I hated my name. I hated the milk. I hated the chicken. I hated the pale color. I hated it all. And there was something very abundantly clear by the end of the night and for the next several days. No one was coming for me. Chapter 13. You do not understand. My cat is in there, Bucky snapped at the lady at the front desk. Our, Tony said, crossing his arms. The lady didn't even bat an eyelash. And as I've repeatedly told you several times, there is no cat undergoing experimentation here at S.H.I.E.L.D. Director Fury would have alerted me, at least to your presence if there was. Bucky loudly cursed Fury out. Steve put a hand on Bucky's shoulder, mentally cursing Fury out with Christian language. He was pissed that Fury had taken Blizzard away from them. How did he think he had the right to do that? Then let us talk to Director Fury, Tony said promptly. I've got a few choice words I need to say to him anyways. Director Fury isn't here right now, the lady continued calmly. Nor has he been here for the past 2 weeks. I assure you there is no cat here, and if there ever was, you'll be the first to know. Now have a nice day. Steve steered Bucky away from the desk. Tony glared at the woman for an extra second before turning sharply on his heel, following after the 2 super soldiers. She's lying, Bucky spat vehemently. Natasha was literally here at headquarters last week with Fury. I know. She knows. She knows that we know. Steve sighed, running a hand through his hair. The problem is actually finding Blizzard. Tony, I don't suppose you could figure out where they're keeping Blizzard. It's been days, Bucky spat before Tony could answer. Who knows what they're doing to her? Didn't you hear her when he shoved her in that carrier? She was terrified and scared and in pain. God only knows what she was thinking when Fury took her away. She must hate us. I should have ripped that carrier out of Fury's grasp and punched him in his good eye. The test had to be run one way or another, Tony said fretfully. But Bruce and I would have taken extra care with her. God, I hope they aren't hurting her. What about Friday? Steve asked again, hoping that Tony hadn't completely lost his head over you, and that he would start figuring out where you were being kept. Huh? What about Friday? Tony asked, snapping out of his daze. All he could imagine was you tied down helplessly to a sterile hospital bed, having several needles stabbed into you not so gently and being tortured. Could she possibly find where the labs are in this building, and maybe we can go in and find Blizzard ourselves? Steve asked. Right away, Tony said, lifting the sleeve of his shirt above his elbow so that he could start playing with the watch on his wrist. He pushed a comment to his ear and said, Follow me. He led the other 2 down the S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters front, before turning down the alleyway, which really wasn't much of an alleyway, and then came across a set of stairs. The handrail painted S.H.I.E.L.D. blue to match the outside of the building. Don't, Tony said sharply as Becky made to walk down the stairs. Let me disable the cameras first, then we go. Tony headed down the stairs first, closely followed by the 2 super soldiers. Once they reached the door, he waited another moment before there was a whirring sound inside, and he opened up the door. Okay, animal experimentation is this way, Tony muttered. Animal experimentation? Bucky asked in disgust. That's like something Hydra would do. It was something that Hydra would do, Steve answered. This wasn't Fury's idea for a branch. It was Alexander Pierce's idea. Then would Fury even keep Blizzard down here? Bucky asked as they walked past several empty cells. They were all empty. I'm guessing not, Steve replied. I suppose we could go back this way, Tony muttered, and they headed back the way they came. Upon entering the human experimentation, they found that most of the cells were empty as well. This seems rather abandoned, Steve commented as they passed the last cell before a set of stairs that led upwards. Wait, Bucky said quickly. Look. They turned to see which room he was looking into. It was a pure white room, like all of the others, except for 3 items inside. 2 silver metal bowls, one filled with milk, the other with small chicken bits. And a small cat bed. Is she even in there? Steve asked, trying to pin down Blizzard's white fur in the room. No, Tony said, scanning the room. They must be experimenting on her right now. Let's go rip their heads off, Bucky growled. Suddenly there were footsteps thundering down the stairs. We need to hide, Steve said quickly. Tony quickly darted across the room, towards the room across from Blizzard's. In here, I disabled the cameras. They slipped into the room, closing the door behind them. All 3 of them stayed pressed up against the wall behind the door so that they could not be seen through the 2-way mirror. That would probably be detrimental. Sorry about the pain today, little kitten, they heard a soft male voice say. You won't have to go through this much longer. Please drink your milk or eat your chicken. It wouldn't be smart to starve yourself. They exchanged a look. Bucky looked like he might just kill someone after the man mentioned you had been in pain. Why is she starving herself? Steve asked softly. Can cats commit suicide? Or is she just not wanting to eat it because it's not the right food? I know that some animals can stop eating if they are stressed or in grief, Tony said. But I don't think that she is willingly committing suicide. Most likely, being put in the carrier brought back bad memories from when Peters tried to kill her. She must have thought something similar was going to happen. Does that mean she might think we let her go? Bucky asked, looking extremely upset. Of course not, Steve said quickly. There's a high probability of that happening, Tony admitted. Steve glared at him. The man's footsteps echoed upstairs, and they quickly left the room, eager to hold you in their arms again. My body hurt so badly I couldn't even move after the young man, whose name was apparently Henry, had put me there on the floor. I was weak, too. I hadn't eaten or drunk anything when I realized that Tony, Steve, and Bucky weren't coming for me. I was alone. Perhaps I was alone forever. So, what was the point of staying alive? It was a subconscious thought. In reality, I was mostly feeling too tired to even climb to my paws to try and put something into my body. Too tired to do anything but lay there, and eventually close my eyes, hoping that I didn't wake up again. I hated the tests. The intelligence tests had been a one and done, but these tests that they called physical tests were terrible. They never seemed to end. They went on for hours at a time, and they hurt. I wondered if my front paw was broken from where the older woman had thrown a baseball at it. They had upgraded from the strange rubbery ball to a baseball after I finally turned the bouncy ball to dust. It had taken a lot of energy. I was fairly certain that today would be my last day. It was almost like I could feel it, like the heavens were welcoming me into its arms. But I had thought that about last night, and also the night before. I wondered if humans had these thoughts, if humans ever thought that there was no reason to live. I wondered if humans ever stopped eating of their own free will, or if they thought of ways that perhaps they wouldn't wake up tomorrow either. But maybe it was just me. Maybe no one else would ever feel this way. I let my eyelids fall close. Yes, it was tonight. I could just feel it through my fur. The door opened again. I didn't look up. I was too tired. I was too sad. I was in pain. Blizzard! The voice barely registered beyond familiar, though I knew it was supposed to be more friendly than that. 2 hands scooped me up, and I realized that one was much colder than the other. I blinked my eyes open, finding myself face to face with a concerned Bucky. We finally found you, Bucky said softly. They have been looking for me? Come on, Blizzard, we need you to drink something, Tony begged, putting the bowls in front of me. I tentatively lapped at the milk before spitting it out. There was something wrong with it. What's wrong, Bucky panicked. It's cow milk, Tony scoffed. Idiots. You either have to get kitten formula or goat milk. You can't give a cat cow milk. Steve dumped the milk out into a corner of the floor, wiping it out with his shirt before pouring a bottle of water into it. Here, Blizz. I lapped up the water, relishing the cool taste against my tongue. This was really happening. They were here to rescue me. They were here to find me. I was going home. right? Bucky and Tony took turns hand-feeding me the chicken, which I ate greedily. My stomach rumbled and growled after they had given me everything, and they looked at each other nervously. "We need to get her out of here," Tony declared. Bucky nodded, scooping me up into his safe arms, striding for the door. "Wait," I mewed, turning in his arms, trying to leap out of them. "Wait, you idiot," Tony shouted, but it was too late. The first thing that happened was that both Bucky and I were flung backwards from the door, pain radiating through both of our bodies. Steve was by our side in an instant, putting a hand on Bucky's forehead and on my back, making sure we were okay. The second thing that happened was a nasally blaring noise that sounded throughout the room. The red lights were flashing like crazy everywhere. "Time to go," Tony demanded, and the nearly invisible lines in front of the door dropped completely. Steve helped Bucky to his feet while Tony scooped me up into his arms. Steve helped Bucky along for the most part, while Tony unlocked doors and made sure that they were getting out of there. "Stop!" the female scientist yelled after them before they darted down a side corridor. I clung to Tony tightly with my claws. I hoped he wouldn't be too mad about the holes that would be left in them. But then I remembered Pepper and her dress, and now I was here. I let go of his shirt, nearly falling out of his arms. Tony was quick in pressing me close to his chest. "Hold tight to me, Blizz," he demanded. I hesitated before deciding to bite his shirt instead. Tony leaped over a banister, and then they were running up and into the sunlight. I yowled, closing my eyes and trying to bury my head into Tony's armpit. I hadn't seen the sun in so long. "Poor baby," Tony murmured, scratching my head in a way that I had missed. "We're going to keep you safe, I promise. You can see the sun every day when we get you home." I hope that he kept true to that promise. "Friday, get the car unlocked and started so that we can get out of here immediately," Tony shouted. I could hear an unevenness to his breathing and the sound of the arc reactor clicking a bit more intensely. I batted at it, trying to get it to stop clicking, but then stopped, because I knew it was important and I didn't want to cause any more damage. Tony climbed into the back seat of the car, letting Bucky drive, and Steve threw himself into the passenger seat. Tires squealed as they made their way out of the city. I curled up in Tony's lap, waiting for his breathing to return to normal, but it never did. Instead, it steadily got worse before he slumped over in his seat. "Tony?" I mewed in panic, pawing at him. "Tony, please wake up! Wake up!" Steve turned around to see what was wrong, and in a tense voice he said, "Bucky, drive faster." Bucky stepped on the gas pedal. I curled up on Tony's chest, licking his cheek, hoping he would wake up. Chapter 14. It was chaos when we got back to the familiar tower. People were rushing out with a stretcher, wearing bright colors. Pepper was running in heels behind them. They opened the car and I hopped into Bucky's lap so that they could pull him out. Pepper was shouting orders, though it sounded hysterical. Bucky and Steve got out of the car, hurrying through the side of the building. Bucky kept me pressed close to his chest the entire time, but once we were in the building, he pulled me up closer, pressing loving kisses to my forehead. "Gosh, Blizz, we have no idea how long we've been trying to find you," he murmured in my ear. "You were?" I mewed quietly. It had felt like years. I could feel the tiredness seeping into my tiny bones already. I needed a nice nap, preferably on top of Steve's head. "Can I hold her?" Steve asked. Bucky shook his head, holding me tighter. "I need to hold her a little longer." Steve pouted a little, but gave Bucky what he wished. He looked directly at me. "Bucky cried for hours after they took you. I promised him we'd get you back." Bucky only held me tighter, and I felt large water droplets fall into my fur. I peeked upwards and another teardrop landed on my nose, and it trailed down, lost in my fur. "Sorry, Blizz," Bucky said, wiping my fur and pulling me up even closer to his face. "I'll pull myself together. Promise." "You are already together." I was puzzled, tilting my head a little and batting his nose with my paw. He looked in one piece anyways. I didn't see any cracks. The elevator doors finally opened and they strode down the hallway towards the bedroom. Steve opened the door, locking it behind them. Bucky flopped down on the bed, carefully laying me across his chest. Steve reached over, stroking my fur. They were pressed close together and I got up, carefully laying myself as far as I could across their bodies. Then I mewed in pain, curling up into a ball. My muscles hurt. "We should take her down to the lab and get some tests done. See where she is hurt and everything," Steve said with a frown. "No test," I mewed, backing up away from Steve, cowering down into the blankets. "No," Bucky said. picking me up gently in his hands. Look how terrified she is, even when you mention Tess. She knows we won't hurt her, and she's still scared. We need to know the extent of the damage so we can help her. Heal. Steve interrupted earnestly. What if something is broken? We have to take x-rays at least so that we can get them to heal properly. Bucky looked hesitant, stroking me with calm, gentle gestures. He looked down at me. Not tonight. Okay, Steve agreed. Not tonight. Mrs. Stark would like you both to know that Mr. Stark is in recovery now and will make it. He should be awake tomorrow morning, the robot lady I had actually missed said suddenly. Thank you, Friday, Steve said. Can you ask Bruce to prepare the x-ray machine for tomorrow? We want to make sure Blizzard is okay both internally and externally. Yes, Captain Rogers, Friday said. You want to sleep with us tonight, Blizz? Bucky asked in a cooing voice as Steve slipped out of bed, undressing himself into just the short black pants, and the rest of him was bare. I carefully hopped onto his chest, curling up on him so that Bucky could do the same. They both slipped under the covers, putting me up between their heads on the pillow. I laid in a comfortable position, which had taken some time to get to as everything else hurt, but once I did that, I was able to fall asleep fairly easily. I only woke up once Bucky began to stir in bed. I found that I was more or less in the same position that I had fallen asleep in. I got to my paws gingerly, wincing as my muscles hurt in so many different places. Do you think there are any medicines we can give her to help her with the pain? Bucky frantically asked Steve as he took in my state of being. Steve's eyes looked equally pained. I don't know. That's a question for Bruce. I think we go down and see him now. It'd be bad to feed her if there's something that needs to be done on an empty stomach. She ate us yesterday, so she should be okay, I hope. Bucky picked me up with such gentleness, I wondered if maybe I might have died and gone to heaven. I didn't even know a human, even one as good as pure as Bucky, could handle something as small and fragile as me with that much gentleness. It still hurt a little, as he was trying to support all four of my legs, and one of them hurt too much when pushed next to the others. But once he got me all settled in his hands, I was able to stretch it out again. His steps were even gentle, walking in a rocking way so that he didn't jolt me too badly. The elevator ride was as smooth as ever. Tony's awake, Nat said as she passed by us. I guessed then that the lab that Tony and Bruce usually worked at and the place that Tony was recovering must be on the same floor. Thank you, Nat, Steve said sincerely, glancing down at me and Bucky's hands. Nat barely gave me a second glance, hurrying into the still-open elevator before the doors closed right away behind her. All of the sudden joy of seeing Steve and Bucky and Tony, all of the joy of being free, diminished a little upon seeing the redhead. It made me remember just how I ended up in this position in the first place. The hurt of seeing these two with a woman that wasn't their soulmate. But I would try not to think about that anyways. It was too painful, and I didn't like pain of any kind. Bruce first, Bucky said. Tony'll have a fit anyways if we went to see him first and didn't take care of her. Steve nodded and we stepped into the semi-empty lab. Bruce was behind his normal desk and there were several machines that I recognized already. Oh good, you can set her down right here, Bruce said, nodding to an empty spot on the counter in front of the machine that I stood on the first day that I was brought into the Avengers Tower. Bucky carefully set me down and I decided to lay on my side for the time being. Bucky hovered with worry until Steve pulled him away and made him sit down on one of the hard plastic chairs that Tony and Bruce had placed around the room in case someone came in for a chat, which was rare. All right, Bruce said. Blizz, can you step onto the machine for me? We just want to scan for any broken bones. I reluctantly got to my paws, trooping into the box. I decided to close my eyes against the fright. I heard the tiny lasers whir, but didn't feel anything once again. Once the lasers whirring stopped, there was a pause, and then there was a robotic voice that said, "Front leg fractured. Healing uneven, already in process. Minor strains on the ribs, healing in process, even. Small tear behind right ear, needs approximately 2 stitches, not healing yet. Bruising up and down the torso and back right leg, healing. Motherfuckers!" Bucky cursed angrily behind me. "Okay, Blizz, you can exit the box now and lay back down," Bruce said quietly, and his footsteps walked away from the box. I backed out quietly, laying right back down on my right side again. It was easier that way. Bucky, those complete, utter assholes! Bucky continued to rant. His feet paced circles around his chair, becoming heavier stomps the angrier he became. "I'm going to punch every single one of those bastards' face in, starting with fury. Bucky." Steve tried again, pushing him back into his seat. one thing at a time. You can't be running off to S.H.I.E.L.D. You gotta stay here with Blizzard, okay? Besides, it wouldn't do for you to show any violence. You know that. S.H.I.E.L.D's got a tight enough watch as it is. I can't lose you. Bucky softened a little, taking Steve's hand in his. Alright, I know. Sorry. I don't blame you, Steve said softly, kissing the top of Bucky's head. I'm furious, too. Bruce came back over with a clipboard, some pieces of paper, and a set of tools that looked very pointy and not very friendly at all. Okay, Bruce sighed. Things get a bit difficult from here. The stitches will be no problem. They'll be tiny, and she'll be on pain meds and numbing agent anyways. The leg, on the other hand, is already healing, but it's healing unevenly, which will cripple her in the future. The one and only solution I have right now is to re-break it and then set it straight. That's going to be painful even on pain meds and numbing agent. I can put her under, but there are always risks of putting animals under, especially ones that are as small as her. If she was a bigger cat, there wouldn't be as many worries. I looked over at Steve and Bucky. They both looked uncertain. There's no other option at all, Steve asked, pondering Bruce's statement. Not with it getting to heal properly, Bruce sighed. I can leave it be. It'll be shorter than the rest of her legs, and most cats can get around pretty well on 3 legs. Although it may lead to the option of having to be amputated in the future, which then comes back to the worry of the anesthesia. She's not going to get any bigger than this. I wasn't entirely sure what amputated was, but it sounded more unpleasant than having my leg rebroken. I think you should just break my leg again, I meowed up at him. I can take it. I got onto my paws, limping over to where Bruce was standing, his arms crossed over his chest, one thumb to the corner of his mouth. I stuck my broken leg out to him. Just hurry up, I'm hungry. Shit, Bucky said. I can't watch. Please, I can't watch. It's okay, Steve and I said at the same time. Here, Steve said, leading Bucky to the door. Just wait out here, I'll get you again when it's done. Bucky left the room, water glistening in his eyes. I kept my gaze on Bruce so I didn't start crying myself as Steve came back over. Is there anything you need me to do, Banner? Steve asked. Just hold her right around the middle so I can give her the pain meds. I'll do the stitches first, give it time to kick in, Bruce said, grabbing 2 syringes. I shied away from them, straight into Steve's hands. It's okay, Blizz, Steve whispered softly in my ear. And I screwed my eyes shut, my ears and tails twitching as Bruce gently inserted the needle into my side. I mewed, but didn't move. I'm sorry, Blizzard, Bruce said. The next one is going to hurt too. Steve, can you support her head? Right here. Steve's fingers pressed gently behind my head. Bruce inserted another needle right below my ear. It wasn't as long, but it did hurt more, and I mewed in pain again. Okay, give this 4 minutes, Bruce murmured. I opened one eye to see a needle and thread in his hands. Can't you use staples? Steve asked, sounding fretful. Her head is way too small, Steve. It has to be done this way. Bruce sounded sympathetic. When the procedure was actually done under my ear, though, I didn't really feel anything. Well, no. That wasn't necessarily it. It was more that I didn't feel any pain. I didn't feel comfortable, of course. It felt like it ought to have hurt, but it didn't really. Like, I knew it was painful, but I couldn't actually feel the pain. Instead, it was this weird, squishy, almost lightheaded sort of feeling all around my ear. Like it had become bouncy? It was a very strange concept. I didn't feel as though I could move my ear, though, even though my reflection showed that I was, indeed, moving it. Steve steeled himself once Bruce put down the other implements. Even Bruce seemed nervous himself, taking many deep breaths before he finally took my paw between his fingers. He hesitated. I can't do it, he muttered, dropping his hands. I'm too strong with the Hulk in me. I need someone else to do it. Like who? Tony can't do it, Steve said. Bucky and I can't do it either, neither can Nat. I don't know, maybe I could get Clint, or... You called? A new voice asked. It was a low, pleasant voice that seemed to come out of nowhere. I turned my head to see a strange man wearing dark blue robes with a red cape come striding out of a orange circle. Oh, Steve finished with a mutter. Or him. Yes, I'm sorry, Bruce said, and I watched as he put down a phone. I need you to break the cat's leg. The strange man blinked. Pardon? Bruce re-explained everything, and the man sat down in front of me. I noticed he had many scars on his hands, and I figured he must be a vet. The scars must be from where several thousand other cats had scratched him. I lifted my broken leg up again, placing it in his hand. He blinked again, looking between Bruce and Steve. "She's smart," was all Steve said. The man sighed, and a very strange orange glow seemed to swirl around my leg. His fingers were gentle before there was a snap. I mewed, throwing my head back in pain, my feet shuffling a little, but I tried not to yank my paw out of the man's hand. I knew he had to reset it. He was very quick in doing whatever else needed to be done, finally putting a tiny pink plaster thing around my leg. I quickly collapsed on my side, panting. Tears were streaming down my fur, matting it. "I'm sorry, Blizzard," Steve whispered, stroking my head. "I'm so sorry." "You said Fury did this?" the man asked, frowning slightly. His hands hovered like he wanted to pet me, but didn't dare in case I reacted badly. "I don't think he himself did it," Nat said, from literally nowhere. Her and Bucky were now standing in the entrance to the room. Bucky wasn't even looking in the room, his gaze fixed to the floor. "More likely he had some scientists running experiments," Bruce said. "The idiot," the man scoffed. I decided I liked the strange man. Besides, he had cool hair. There were gray streaks in it on either side, and he was very nice looking. I wondered if he liked cats. He must, if he worked with them every day as a job, right? "Thank you, Stephen," Steve said. "We were trying to figure out who was going to do it who didn't have super strength." "Wong has me doing stupid things," Stephen said with an eye roll. "There's been nothing life-threatening on our end, and one of the interns let the portal of the Pacific Ocean in. Needless to say, it's been a mess cleaning it up. I was glad to get out of the sanctorum." He said a few more words between himself and Bruce, while Bucky fretted over me like a doting mother or something. I was honestly surprised he didn't start licking my wounds himself. Stephen was gone in a whirl of orange. "Take her back to her room and give her half of one of these every 10 hours with both food and water," Bruce said, handing Steve a small orange bottle with a white cap on it. "Half. And don't overload her with food. Whatever she ate yesterday was the first thing she ate in almost 6 days. I'm not entirely sure why she was starving herself, perhaps because she's smart enough to realize it was her only way out, but either way you need to monitor everything." "Thank you for everything, Bruce," Steve said as Bucky picked me up in his arms. He cradled me, being careful of my now pink leg. "It's really no problem, Steve," Bruce said, waving it off. He started to clear off his desk of the machines and the other tools that he had used to help me. Bucky and Steve started to walk out of the room, but I felt I needed to say something else to Bruce for helping me. "Thank you. Bye," I said, lifting my good paw and waving it. Bruce looked up, his serious expression slowly melting into a smile as he waved back slightly, before picking up the machine and carrying it over to an empty shelf. "Good kitty," Bucky whispered softly in my ear, kissing the top of my head. I was home. Chapter 15. A few days later, everything was mostly healed. The stitches had dissolved, and Bucky kindly informed me that my fur hid any of the scar that could have possibly been seen. Apparently, it was very, very tiny. Bruce took another scan today, and all the cracks along my ribs were already gone, or almost gone. The bruising had gone down as well. The large one on my back leg had shrunk so that it was tiny and would be gone within the next 3 or so days. It no longer hurt to lay on my side, and any other position that I wanted to, so long as I minded my front leg that was still wrapped in its pink plaster. Getting around with the plaster on it was awkward and confusing, but it wasn't too bad. "I think we could go and see Tony now," Bucky said. They had been holding off on me seeing Tony, so that when I did finally see Tony, he wouldn't blow a fuse, thinking that they hadn't been taking proper care of me, or something. "Yes, let's go see Tony," I mewed enthusiastically, putting my paws on his arm. "Blizzard agrees," Steve said with a smile. "And I think Tony has been dying to see her anyways." That sentence made me very happy. Steve picked me up this time, cradling me the same way that they had been cradling me once I had gotten the damn plaster on my leg. The two of them locked the bedroom door behind them, making their way to the elevators. The elevator doors opened, and I hissed in displeasure upon seeing the stupid blonde lady there. "Hi, Steve. Hi, James," Blondie said with a smile. "Hey, Sharon," Bucky said with a nod. He seemed a bit in his mind right now, not even really noticing her fully, and that pleased me. "Hi, Sharon," Steve said softly. His cheeks were a bit more pink, and his smile was more genuine than Bucky's. I frowned, wishing my leg wasn't broken so I could wiggle out of his arms and climb into Bucky's. Or leap at Blondie's face. Was that too mean? "Where are you two going?" Sharon asked. Down to Tony's, Steve said. Blizzard wants to see him, and he wants to see Blizzard. I don't think doesn't matter what Pepper wants, Bucky said in a rough voice. It's all up to Tony. He isn't exactly the best judge of character when it comes to his own health, James, Sharon said, her voice turning hard against them. Fight, 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 I chanted in my head with interest. Maybe if they fought, they would stop being together. This isn't about his health at all, Bucky snapped. This is about him wanting to see Blizzard. She makes him happy. She's a care animal, and a care animal? The blonde woman made a shrieking sound of protest that really hurt my ears. Care animals don't put the ones they are supposed to be caring about in the hospital, James. She didn't put enough, Steve said firmly, causing both of them to snap their mouths shut, turning away from each other. I wiggled in Steve's arms a little, and he relinquished me over to Bucky, who took me eagerly. I hissed at Sharon over his shoulder before snuggling into him. Good kitty. Bucky whispered so lightly in my ear I knew the other two couldn't possibly have heard. Maybe he didn't like stupid Blondie either. Bucky is touchy about Blizz, Sharon. Steve sighed, and Bucky snapped his head up as the elevator doors opened. I don't need you to make excuses for me, Steven, he barked, striding out of the elevator. Bucky! Steve shouted in frantic protest behind him. Bucky didn't turn back around, striding forward at a great pace. We passed Bruce in his lab, who was so absorbed in his work he didn't even notice us. We passed several doctors and nurses, talking together in gathered clumps in the hallways. They gave us sparing glances, but nothing more than that. Finally, Bucky jerked open a door so hard that he almost tore it off the hinges, and only relaxed once it closed lightly behind the two of us. Tony was in a hospital bed, surrounded by machinery. There were several IVs stuck in his arms, and he was resting lightly against the headboard, though it had been lowered to a 43-degree angle. Enough so that he was sitting up, but also so that he was partially laying down. Tony looked exhausted, his eyes somewhat droopy, and a dazed look in those eyes as well. Hey, Barnes. You look like shit, Stark, Bucky said, sitting down in the hard plastic chair next to Tony's bed. He placed me up on Tony's lap. Hey, look at you, Tony said softly, reaching out to pet my head. I purred, rubbing the top of my head along his hand. You look good, Blizzard. How many days till the leg gets healed? According to Bruce, it's already healed, Bucky said. But he wants to keep the cast on till tomorrow, just to make sure it's completely straight. Oh, so that's why it didn't hurt anymore. How bad was it? Tony asked, still petting me. Pretty bad. She's got a little scar by her ear now. Bruce had to stitch it up. And her, leg had, already been healing unevenly, so Bruce called Strange over to re-break it, Bucky huffed, and there were minor strains on her ribs, bruising all over. Tony's eyes seemed to flash a little, but he mostly looked... Well, he looked kind of stupid. I'm going to kill Fury next time I see him, he mumbled. Damn, how much did they dope you up? Sam asked. I looked over to see that he had just entered with Steve and Sharon. Sharon stayed by the door while Steve and Sam approached. Sam was grinning and Steve looked solemn. I can't feel anything, Tony said with just the slightest smile. What do you want, bird brain? Just breaking up couple fights, Sam said, clapping Steve on the shoulder. Thought I'd check on you, and Blizzard. Sam rubbed my head with his fingers, and I loved the sensation. I purred again. Sam sat down in another chair, sitting between Bucky and Steve. How much longer are you in for? Well, they've completely fixed the arc reactor, Tony mumbled, eyelids fluttering, and Sam's grin grew wider. They haven't put it in yet. I still got the faulty one for now. Don't even know how it got faulty in the first place. The spy, probably, Steve sighed, rubbing his head. Tony made a soft snorting noise that also sounded a bit like a snore. It's in my chest, Rogers. It's not like they messed with one of my machines, and I never sleep. You've been sleeping ever since the cat starts dragging you to bed, Sharon said from the doorway, arms crossed over her unflattering chest. Tony glared at her with dagger eyes. I'm just saying maybe Fury had a point, Sharon said lightly. Your arc reactor only starts working up once that cat starts dragging you to bed, when you're actually sleeping because the cat made sure you fell asleep. That's enough, Sharon, Bucky said. You're all blinded by your love for the cat, but I'm just saying you all need to open your eyes, Sharon sighed before falling silent again. Tony rolled his eyes dramatically, pulling me even closer up on his lap. Ignore the mean woman over there. You're adorable and innocent. Sharon scoffed, rolling her eyes, but she still made no move to leave the room. She only pulled out what looked like an extremely thin book and started making slow up motions with her finger on the page. Tony and Bucky talked for a little longer, sometimes Sam throwing in a funny jest or Steve saying something serious. Sharon was soon forgotten in the back of the room. "When's Pepper going to check in on you?" Steve asked during part of the conversation. I was getting hungry, so they were getting ready to leave so we could go up to the kitchen and get some food. "Sometime around noon," Tony said, looking up at the clock. The big hand was almost at the 12, and the little hand was pretty close, behind. So, basically in like 5 minutes or something, her and Happy went to go and get cheeseburgers. Sam chuckled, clapping Tony on the shoulder gently. "Get some rest, Dopey." "I'm not a dwarf," Tony muttered. "Could have fooled me," Bucky said with a grin. "Oh, shut up, Barnes," Tony said, but was in an almost loving way. Everyone seemed to be one great big family here, and I was part of it. "Come give me a kiss, Blizz," Tony said. I scampered up his shirt, resting my front paws on the top of the metal thing in his chest, licking his cheek excitedly. Suddenly there was a loud screech. "Tony!" I was slightly startled by Pepper's frantic voice as she rushed over, tossing a bag of greasy-smelling food onto one of the tables. It stood on end for a moment before falling sideways, a couple of salty fries spilling out onto the table. "Get off of him!" Pepper shrieked, and I scampered backwards, rolling off Tony's leg onto the table. "Oi!" Bucky said angrily, his chair tilting over and crashing to the floor with a bang. "Pepper!" Tony protested, trying to sit up before groaning in pain. "No!" Pepper shrieked at Tony, her hands reaching for me. In a panic, I scampered even farther backwards, which caused me to fall into space. Tony jerked upright in a reaching motion, while Steve dove forward, catching me before I smacked onto the tile floor. I squirmed out of his hand, shooting under the desk. "What the hell?" Bucky fumed at Pepper. "She cannot be on him," Pepper fumed, pushing Tony back into his seat, lifting his shirt up. "The arc reactor is fragile right now, and her paws were on it. What if she had pushed it further down? What if she had tried using it to climb higher on him like she did my dress? What then? She would have killed him. She almost already killed him when he went to go and save her. I cannot lose Tony. Get the cat out of here now, James." Wait. I had almost killed Tony? I had almost killed Tony because he tried to save me? Did save me? It was my fault that he was in the bed right now, and I could have hurt him again? I hurt him whenever I put my paws on the glowy thing in his chest. "Shut up," Bucky snapped. "She can understand everything you're saying." "Don't tell my wife to shut up, Barnes," Tony said. "Pep, listen." "No," Pepper said shortly to Tony. "Don't tell me to listen. You have never cared about your health. You don't care if the cat kills you as long as you get some nice pets in. But I can't lose you. You need to stop being so selfish. You need to start taking care of yourself. Please, Tony." Tears were glistening in her eyes as she finished the last bit. Pepper whirled around, looking down at me hiding under the desk. "Stay away from Tony. I cannot lose him because of your childness. You cannot climb on him." "Pepper," Steve protested, but I was already running. I sprinted towards the door, shooting past the blonde lady. Tears welled up in my brown eyes, and I ran. I could just faintly hear Tony starting to shout at Pepper, and Bucky was shouting for me. Steve was trying to tell people to calm down. I ran a little more, skidding to a stop inside the elevator because there was nowhere else to go. The redhead was in the elevator, exiting, and once she heard all the shouting, she looked down at me. "Well, there you go again." Then she walked towards the yelling. I shrunk back far into the corner of the elevator. The doors closed. It went up. I started to run once the doors opened once more, finding myself on a floor that I had never explored before. There were lots of plants on this floor, blooming beautifully, and there was a stream that trickled through. It was like a nature floor. I skidded to a stop when I saw Eye Patch on the wooden bridge, his hands in his trench coat pocket. He glanced over at me. "I'm not here to take you back." That was the only thing that made me stop running, pausing. I didn't dare stop looking around, though. "Maybe I was wrong in the first place," Fury sighed, running a hand down his face. "God, you don't know what it's like," he sighed again. But that wasn't an excuse. Truth was, I was scared. I guess that's something you can only admit to a cat. But these people in this building, they're my family, in a word, and we do stupid, harsh things to protect our families, I guess. I guess I thought if you really were a spy, you'd hurt them, because they cared too much for you. But maybe you're exactly what they needed in their life. He bent down, putting something down on the ground. "That's for you. Take it to Bruce or Tony to test it first, I don't care. I wouldn't blame you. It's a healing pill. They're specifically made for cats and rabbits. It doesn't fix anything, I get that. But it's an attempt to make up for what I've wrongly done, for what I think are the right reasons. Maybe even my reasons were wrong. He turned, leaving what I figured was a different way than the way that I had come. Maybe there was another elevator on the other side of the building. There were lots of elevators everywhere. I padded over to the box and picked it up gingerly with my teeth. To Bruce we go, I guess. Chapter 16. Bruce was still working on the pain medicine, so I did my best staying out of everyone's way. I didn't want Pepper to yell at me again, and I didn't want to hear Bucky and Steve fight again either, especially not over me. I debated about finding Billy and Tommy before I remembered that they didn't live in the tower most of the time. Wanda and Vision had a house somewhere in New York that they stayed at instead. I decided to explore a few more floors that I had never been to keep me occupied from doing any more harm. There was a floor that was made of what seemed like precious, fragile things. There were items made of glass on pedestals of marble. Paintings hung on walls in what seemed like gilded gold frames. None of the art that was actually on the canvas made any sense to me, but I liked the pretty swirls of color. Another floor seemed rather the same as the first floor, except that it seemed less formal. There were several canvases set up on easels, but none of them seemed filled with much color. Some of them had gray and black outlines on them, as though they were in the middle of being drawn. There were lots of beige, baggy cloths that covered the walls and floor, dotted with paint drips. There were a couple of completed paintings that hung on the very back wall. One was a woman with deep brown hair and full red lips. Another was of Bucky, looking shiny on the canvas. He was wearing a strange uniform outfit that was almost a beige or perhaps an olive green. Another was of me in Bucky's arms. Actually, a lot of the drawings were of Bucky, or of Bucky and me. I was starting to think that maybe one of the Avengers knew how to paint and draw. Probably, considering the popular topic of the art was Steve. I wondered who the brown-haired lady was. Their soulmate? A third floor had lots of pointy things on the walls. Most of them were straight, or mostly straight. They were almost all in a silvery color, though it varied on whether these blades were dull or shining. There were a couple of weapons that really just looked like big sticks with points. They were even made of wood. There were several dozen bows and arrows, all of different sizes and makes. It was very strange seeing all of these weapons on the wall. Why were they on a wall? What were they defending from? Why had they let them collect a layer of dust? Didn't they need these for missions? But it was the fourth floor that I liked the most. When it opened up, I mewed happily as there were many, many bright colors. The floor changed from tile or wood to something very squishy and pleasant. The floor was multicolored, seemingly like a big, large puzzle piece put together. I think it was made of foam, and it covered the floor from corner to corner. There were thousands of toys spread out everywhere, a dollhouse with 20 dolls laying around it, heaps of doll clothes laying around the dolls. There were orange trucks with different mechanisms so that they did different things. There were trains with faces on them, sitting stationary on a large track that also seemed to cover the room. I wondered why the trains had faces. There were plastic animals that littered the floor, and I knew all of them by name because of the test that I had to run with Fury's assistance. A plastic white sheep. That dotted thing was a cow. In nature, if I were to have seen these animals in real life, I would have known what they were, but seeing them in plastic casing was different. I didn't know what they were until I was told. It was weird. There were several doors in this room, all of them open either fully or halfway. Pleased with the first room, I made my way to the door on the left. I opened up onto another balcony, the sun shining rays beaming down onto the large, very high circular thing that sat there. I could smell some sort of chemical, though it wasn't heavy, and I hopped up onto the ladder stairs that were there, taking them carefully so I didn't fall one way or the other. It seemed to be water, but I didn't like the smell of the water. It smelled like a chemical, and I wasn't pleased with this as the other. So I hopped back down the ladder. In truth, I didn't like water, period, no matter how it smelled, and went back into the colorful room. I trotted over to the next door and found that it too was outside. The walkway was far too large and wide to be called a balcony, though. There was even green grass, and it seemed to me that the only way it could be hanging off the side of Avengers Tower was magic. Spread out all across this balcony, was what seemed like a very, very large playground. It too spread from one side of the balcony to the next. It was definitely made of metal, with what seemed like 10,000 slides. Some were straight, some curved, some had the tunnel thing over the slides, and some were wide open. There were 1,000 tunnels for kids to climb through, and several of those seats that you had to sit on, and they spin so that you get dizzy. There was a strange wheel that looked like it would turn as well, like a smaller version of a carousel without the horses. There were several straight beams with seats that I recognized from Mr. Peters' house as a seesaw. There was a huge swing set as well, along with this great big rope tower that connected to the playground. It went up into a point made of strong rope and metal bolts. I decided that eventually, not today, I would like to climb up to the top. There was what looked like a low rock wall, and though it didn't go as high as the rope tower, it was very wide with several tunnels inside. The tunnels extended forever, and perhaps even led to small rooms inside the rock. All of this was propped up on a sort of squishy surface that was also hard, and also chunks of black pieces that sort of smelled like a black road. I purred. I loved this room. The next room was very different. It was painted in a light blue and pink color, so pastel it could have passed for white. There was a large white rocking chair in the corner. There were a couple of toys in here as well, mostly small cars, and a few stuffed animals that came in brown bear, pink rabbit, and green caterpillar. But there were also shelves upon shelves of books. The furniture that held the books were also white, and all of the books were super thin, with colorful bindings and large words on the covers. The last room was a surprise. The walls were a soft pink, and the lights were very dim. There was a small white bookcase in the corner that was half filled with books. There was a blue, comfy, squashy chair in the corner that had a book sitting in its seat. There was a light pink crib at the far corner of the wall, which had a mobile of tiny red and gold flying men on them, little flames coming out of their hands and feet. I leapt up onto the crib, looking down and was interested to see something moving in there. I leapt down onto the soft bedding of the crib and sniffed at it. It seemed like a human, but a very tiny one. I padded up to where its head was, its large brown eyes staring up at me. I couldn't tell how old it was, nor could I really tell if it was a boy or a girl. I suppose by the color scheme it must be a girl, though. One little hand reached out, grabbing my leg. Its grip was very firm, but not too tight. I wondered if this was where the Avengers came from, if they trained these little people right here in their house to become a superhero. If so, this one must be a dud. It wasn't very strong, or maybe it just needed more training. I sniffed at her again and found that I could smell milk. I let my nose lead me to where little sounds were babbling out of her lips at me, small coos and what I thought might even be a laugh. There was white liquid on her lips, and that was the milk. I looked tentatively at the milk, feeling thirsty after my escapades. If she wasn't going to drink it, then I could, and I would. Or at least until that horribly familiar screeching started to screech again. "No!" Pepper shouted. I could hear the familiar clickety-clack of her heels as she rushed towards the crib. I looked up from where I was standing over the little human, and Pepper picked me up by the scruff of my neck, tossing me to the floor. I tumbled over the carpet, shaking myself off from the roll. Pepper was sobbing, and I was scared, and the little human was crying. Pepper glared down at me with large, round blue eyes. I realized strangely that she was scared too. But why? Blizzard. Her voice was shaky, trembling as she clutched the little human to her chest. You cannot do that. You'll kill her. You need to go back. Go back to Buck and Steve and stay in your room. It is so irresponsible for them to let you wander wherever you want to. She bent down, picking me up by the scruff of my neck again. She held the little human in one arm. She stormed over to the already opening elevator, and it started to descend before the doors were even closed. I supposed Robot Lady was on Pepper's side. Friday? Ban Blizzard from going anywhere but Roger Barnes' room in the kitchen, Pepper declared. Yes, Mrs. Stark, Friday said. My ears sunk down against my head in disappointment. The elevator door slid open, and I found myself back in my home hallways, leading to my room, which I guess was now my new cell. Bucky rushed down the hallway trying to grab me from Pepper's hands, but she swung me out of the way, causing me to mule out in fear. Give her to me, Pepper, Bucky growled. "Where's Steve?" Pepper asked, ignoring Bucky. "Right here," Steve said, leaning against the doorway of his bedroom. "What now?" I tried to shrink up inside myself. It was like he had expected me to cause a problem. Maybe it was best that I was confined to this room. Pepper's fingers tightened around the scruff of my neck. It was just loose fur and it wasn't like it hurt, but I still wiggled in her hand, uncomfortable. "Do you even know where your cat was?" she yelled at them. "No, you don't. Well, I'll tell you. She was upstairs in Morgan's nursery, licking milk from her lips and suffocating her. Your cat almost killed my baby." She shoved me into Bucky's arms, and Bucky was quick in his reflexes to catch me, holding me to his firm chest. "She's a kitten," Bucky roared right back at her. "She doesn't know any better, Pepper." "Bucky, stop," Steve said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Pepper. We really were trying to find her." "She ran out earlier this morning in the lab, also because of you," Bucky snapped. Steve shot him a warning glance. "And we'll keep a better eye on her. I took care of that," Pepper said, holding Morgan with both arms now. She's confined to this floor, in our kitchen. Friday won't be taking her anywhere, and none of you can override the commands." Bucky's mouth dropped, and Steve clamped a hand over it quickly. "Okay. And I'm really sorry about Morgan. I know Blizzard didn't mean any harm, but she doesn't know any better. It won't happen again despite the restrictions on her moves, I promise." Pepper just nodded, her face red and blotchy, eyes strained with tears. She turned on her heel and stomped away. "Bucky, they're treating her the way they treated me." Bucky spat. "And you know it, Steve. She's not dangerous. You should know better." Bucky stormed into the room that the two of them shared, slamming the door behind him. He let out a sob, putting me down in my cat bed, before curling up on the floor next to me. I wanted to comfort him, wanted to lick his cheek and tell him it was all right. But what if I suffocated him like Morgan? What if I killed him? Pepper said I might have. Bucky sniffed, opening his eyes to look at me. His eyes became even more sad when he saw me hunched down in a small ball. He picked me up, placing me on his chest. I made sure there was no important arc reactor there, so I didn't kill him there either. There was not. "You ignore Pepper. You hear me?" Bucky sniffled. "You're a good kitten, and you've done nothing wrong, ever. You're innocent and pure, and you only ever try to help people. Don't change because of her, Blizzard. You don't have to be scared of me, I promise." "I don't want to hurt you," I mewed softly. "Don't be sad," Bucky whispered again, petting me over the head. He lifted me up even higher. "Will you give me a kiss?" "I don't want to kill you," I pleaded with round eyes. "Please," he begged. I couldn't stand to see him beg. I tentatively licked his cheek. It was salty from the tears, and there was also that other taste from whatever soap he had used in the shower today. Something natural like honey and lime. A huge grin spread out across his face, so I licked him again and again. He started to laugh, and I felt my spirits grow lighter. Bucky had told me not to listen to Pepper, and Bucky loved me. Bucky knew it was best for me, not Pepper, so I would not listen to Pepper. I continued to plant kisses on Bucky until he rolled over, hugging me tightly. "God, I love you, Blizzard. You make my life complete." "I love you too, Bucky. I wish you knew that I did," I meowed softly, crawling up his body so that I could curl up on the middle of his chest. He covered me with one hand, and we both slowly drifted off to sleep. Chapter 17. "Come on, Blizzard, we're going to go outside today," Bucky said, putting me up on his shoulder as he stooped over to pick up his jacket. He put the leather jacket over his metal arm, letting me reposition myself as he headed towards the kitchen. "But I'm not allowed on the ground floor," I asked him. Bucky didn't answer, striding towards the door that led to the kitchen balcony. Some of the team members liked to eat outside, so there was always a balcony off the kitchen. There were usually a half-dozen tables and chairs out there, 2 of them with large umbrellas in case it rained. Sam was on the balcony, sitting on the railing so that if he slid forwards he'd fall to the city below. "Sam, be careful," I meowed. Sam and Bucky were my 2 favorite people at the moment. Steve and Bucky were still fighting, which hurt both of them badly, and I really hoped they made up soon. However, the good side was that neither of them had been with Nat or Blondie since their fight. I also hadn't seen Tony, since Pepper had all but thrown me out of the hospital wing. I didn't know if he was still recovering, or if Pepper had banned him from seeing me. I hadn't seen Pepper either, not that I was complaining on that front. It was so strange that just a few months ago she was one of my favorite people. Why had she changed? Was it really the party? I guess I understood that I had slightly embarrassed her, pulling her dress down a little. I hadn't meant it, something I had tried to convey to Steve, Bucky, Tony, Sam, and Pepper, and anyone else that would listen to me. But of course, no one understood. Or maybe it wasn't me, exactly. It was the fact that I had put Tony and her daughter in danger multiple times. It wasn't me, per se, it was my actions, because I didn't know any better. Or, as Bucky repeatedly said, I was just a kitten. Well, perhaps I was, but that didn't excuse me from hurting others, did it? No, I didn't think it did. I would have to become better somehow. I wasn't entirely sure how to do this, though. However, I was aware that every time I had almost killed someone, it was because I was touching them. I decided I would not willingly touch anyone anymore. Perhaps if they touched me, or like with Bucky, asking me for kisses, that would be all. I had made a mental list in my head. Don't climb on people. Don't lick other people. Hide from Pepper. Continue list if anything else needs to be added. Now Sam looked over his shoulder at our approach, smiling. He had something strange on his back and had some red goggles up on his forehead. About time, James. I thought you were going to chicken out. I'm taking the elevator, Bucky said with no humor in his voice. Sam held his arms out, and I carefully maneuvered myself off Bucky's shoulder so that Sam could hold me. I'm warning you, Wilson. You drop her, and you're dead. I wasn't entirely sure why I was in Sam's arms. I gingerly looked over the railing, and my tiny cat heart almost fell out of my tiny cat ass. We were so freaking high up. Cars looked like tiny toy cars zooming around down there, and any other houses that were only 2 stories high looked like little boxes. People looked like singular dots on a map, moving in and out in blobs of brown, black, and sometimes red. See you down there, then, Sam said, leaping off the building. I yowled, pushing myself completely into him. His arms tightened around me so tight on a normal day I would have squirmed out of them in complaint. Now, I was thankful for the tight hold, because maybe it would help me survive when he splattered against the concrete. But then, there was a swooping sensation, and 2 very large metallic-looking wings came out of his back, and we were gliding down to the front of the tower. There was a green, grassy park area, and that is where Sam landed. It wasn't a gentle landing, a jolting sensation as he landed on his feet, the wings going back into the backpack on his back. Sam put me down on the grass, which I paraded on, leaping and rolling around. I had missed being outside very much, and I was glad that Bucky was letting me out today. I pawed at Sam's leg. Thank you. Sam knelt down, scratching me behind the ears. I hope you have fun outside today. Bucky should be along in a moment. Yep, there he is. Bucky jogged over, clapping Sam on the shoulder and thanking him. Come on, Blizzard, Bucky said, starting to walk along the concrete sidewalk. I was glad that he didn't pick me up, because it gave me a chance to run around. I leaped up onto the brick wall, walking alongside Bucky. Occasionally would climb another few inches higher, and soon I was at head level with Bucky. Careful, Blizzard, Bucky said, but he didn't reach up to grab me. I was very careful as I trotted across the thick wall before it started to go back down again. I ran the last few feet before I leaped down onto the concrete again. I landed on the concrete, and we arrived at a park. It was mostly empty, a father pushing his daughter on the swing, and 2 kids playing in the sandbox while their mother watched them. Bucky led me over to the opposite side of the park, where there was a grassy field next to a concrete floor. It was damp, a drain in the middle, and there were several metal holes everywhere. Careful, Blizzard, you won't want to walk over them, Bucky said as he sat down in the grassy area. I sat down in front of one of the holes, wondering where it led to. Bucky put his hand over the hole, and water shot up out of it. It wasn't very high. It would probably barely have reached the kid's waist. It was cold, though, and I hissed, jumping up and running away from it before approaching it again, carefully. Others jumped up without Bucky putting a hand over them. They're on a timer, Bucky said. It's like a water park of sorts, but a very small one. I thought you'd like it. I did like it, actually. I did like swimming when it was very shallow, or when they kept me in their arms. Water was actually very nice, although it made my fur all puffy. I didn't used to like water, but since I could only be in Bucky's room, I found the bathtub was a fun place to be. I pranced around the water, leaping, splashing, and playing. Bucky had brought sandwiches in his backpack, along with some plums and other small foods. He gave me bits of chicken that came in a plastic box. After that, we curled up in the grass together. He read a book and I laid out on his chest, while his other hand stroked my fur. It wasn't until the sun started to go down that our peace was interrupted. "I've been looking everywhere for you, Buck," Steve's voice interrupted my nap. Bucky didn't move a muscle, still reading the book as he answered in a monotone voice. "I told you I was going out today." "I thought I was coming with you," Steve replied. I stretched out on Bucky's stomach before walking up his chest to curl up in the crook of his arm, looking at Steve. Steve looked tired, his hands in his pockets. His hair was a mess and there were dark shadows under his eyes. "You wouldn't have approved of taking Blizzard out," was all Bucky said before flipping a page. Suddenly, I rather wanted them to make up. I didn't like that they were all sad with each other. I nudged Bucky's palm slightly, but he just petted me in return, not bothering to look at Steve. "Bucky, come on. You know I love Blizzard too. Why are we fighting?" Steve asked, taking a few steps closer. "Because you didn't fight Peppers. If Pepper wants to make some changes so that she feels she's keeping her family safe, Tony loves Blizzard just as much. Pepper shouldn't get to make, at least with her daughter. Blizzard wouldn't hurt a child." Bucky finally spat. I got to my feet, padding over to where Steve was standing, before I bit the end of his pants, trying to drag him over to Bucky. Steve looked down and slowly started to move forward as I dug my little paws into the ground to drag him over. Steve obliged until he was toe-to-toe with Bucky, though Bucky was laying down and Steve was standing up. I moved behind him, putting my paws on the back of his leg, trying to push him over. "Okay, that's pretty adorable," Bucky muttered as Steve carefully kneeled. I quickly leaped upwards, pushing him in the back so that he was laying on top of Bucky. I meowed with pride as they embraced each other, then got frustrated when they didn't kiss. I leapt on Steve's back and batted his head. He laughed. "I think she wants me to kiss you, Bucky." Bucky said in a thoughtful tone. "Should I?" I hissed, leaping off Steve and batted Bucky's cheek. Bucky laughed, pushing me away slightly. All right. He kissed Steve, and I sat down, meowing proudly again. Steve rolled over, landing on the other side of me so that I was smushed between the two of them. "She's adorable," Steve said, and then sighed. "I really am sorry, Bucky. You know I really do love her. I'm sorry about Pepper's restrictions, and I'm sorry that you're upset. No, I'm sorry. I'm being such a dumbass. I should have just talked through it. I'm just so used to responding with actions now instead of words," Bucky sighed. "It just reminds me of how they treated me at first when I started living in the tower. Like I couldn't be trusted. Blizzard is smart, you know that, and she's harmless. You and I both know that she would never harm a soul." "I know. Tony is upset about Pepper's rules. He wants to see her, but even the doctors are saying he shouldn't until he gets the arc reactor fixed to be more stable. And I researched it. Cats can accidentally kill babies by licking milk out of their mouths. It's an accident, but Pepper doesn't want to risk that with Morgan. However, I don't think she should be restricted to only 2 floors." Bucky sighed. "I just hate when someone attacks her, verbally or physically. It pisses me off. I feel so protective of her." I meowed softly, licking his cheek lightly. "Has she been acting differently ever since Pepper?" Steve drifted off. "She won't curl up on me anymore, especially not on my chest where Tony's arc reactor is on his chest. She doesn't really touch me, period, anymore unless I ask her. It kind of makes me sad, but Pepper did put it in her head that doing those things would kill someone, so I don't blame her," Bucky sighed. "It's okay," Steve said, scratching me behind the ears. "No one is going to harm her, Buck. Not anymore." The two of them held each other as the sun went down, while I curled up between their hard chests, very proud of myself for doing something right. Chapter 19. After I came back home from the park, Pepper did lighten up some of my restrictions. However, I always had to be accompanied by either Steve, Bucky, Sam, or someone else that I was close to in the Avengers. Which left Steve, Bucky, and just Sam at this point. I still hadn't seen Tony. But a few weeks later, I was eating up on the kitchen table in the community room, a daily occurrence that Pepper no longer partook in, when the elevator door opened down the hallway. I was perplexed, as everyone was already there, and Pepper was not coming. Bruce sat down at one end, talking to Nat, whose back was to Clint, who was chatting with Scott and Sam. Steve and Bucky were talking quietly amongst themselves, sometimes Rode chiming in. That was when Tony entered the room, looking both disgruntled and much better than the last time I had seen him. He came over to the other end of the table, sitting right next to Steve so that he could reach out and pet me. I flattened myself against the table as he petted me, unwilling to move a muscle, lest I lose control and hurt him. "Is she okay?" Tony asked, startling Steve a little. Bucky picked me up in his hands, getting up from the table to walk around and sit on Tony's other side. "She's just afraid of hurting you," Bucky said gently, putting me down on the table right in front of Tony. "You're not gonna hurt him, Blizz. I promise. He got a new arc reactor that you won't be able to budge, even if you jumped on it. You can let him hold you and stuff now, remember? I said don't listen to anything Pepper said." Tony's voice was even more angry than before. "What did Pepper say to her?" I let his hands pick me up, though I was very careful with my paw placement as he held me against his chest. Well, more his shoulder. He rubbed his cheek gently against the top of my head. "I missed you," he mumbled. "Just that she could have killed you if she messed with the arc reactor anymore," Clint said with a shrug. I let out a small whine, wiggling against Tony's shoulder. Tony just held me there tighter. "Don't listen to Pepper on that, Blizz," Tony whispered softly in my ear. "You wouldn't have done a damn thing messing with my arc reactor. It was dislodged from something else, not you. Promise." That did make me feel a little better, and I curled up warmly against his shoulder. "Where's Pepper this morning?" Bucky asked. "She had to leave again to take care of some Stark Industries meeting in California," Tony said comfortably. "She took Morgan with her as well, and Hope is going to watch over her out there." "Oh, that's good. How long is she going to be there?" Bruce asked, joining the conversation. "Not too long, maybe a week or two," Tony said with a shrug. "Depends on the meetings and stuff. Thank God I don't have to worry about that stuff anymore." Rhodes smiled. "Like you ever worried about it in the first place." I fell asleep against Tony's shoulder, feeling warm and loved. "You're kidding." Tony's voice snarled through the room. I was curled up in Bucky's arms, terrified. Eye Patch Man was back, sitting comfortably in a chair at the front of the room. Bucky stood at the complete opposite side of the room, close to the door, his hold on me tight. "I am not kidding, Stark. Thor says that he will keep an eye—" "How is Thor supposed to keep Loki in check when he's never been able to do it before?" Steve asked. "I really don't think Loki should live in this tower," Bruce said. "He did try and use it as an alien calling beacon once before." "I really don't feel like pissing off some royal space gods," Eye Patch snapped. "So you're going to host Loki, and Thor is going to keep an eye on him. That's final." "Good. Are you leaving now?" Bucky snapped. Eye Patch sighed. "I'm not here for the cat. But you really should keep an eye on her. I already heard from Mrs. Stark about her trying to kill Morgan." "She didn't try to kill Morgan," Bucky and Tony snapped together. Eye Patch put his hands up in surrender. "Needless, you can keep her. For the time being." Steve crossed his arms across his chest, and the others started to file out of the room. Bucky was out of there very quickly, heading to the kitchen, which was my favorite room in the house. "I can't believe Thor is bringing Loki here," Bruce muttered, pulling out several ingredients to make a sandwich. Bucky pulled out a container of lovely chicken, putting a few tiny pieces on a plate for me, and giving it to me. "He's lost his mind," Nat agreed, pouring herself another mug of bitter-smelling black liquid. "I'm going to have to let Laura know that I can't come back yet," Clint muttered, pulling out his phone. "Clint," Rhodes started to say in a warning tone, but Nat was already storming out of the room. She slammed the cup down on the table as she passed by, was shattered, and I leapt backwards as the liquid quickly started its warpath across the table. I mewed in distress as my chicken strips were tainted in the liquid, and batted my paw at the plate. "Sorry, Blizz," Sam said with a slight laugh, picking me up and putting me on the counter before grabbing me a fresh plate of chicken and some goat milk to go with it. "Really, Clint?" Steve sighed, grabbing several paper towels to clean up the mess. "Couldn't keep that little thought to yourself, could you?" "Sorry," Clint muttered as he finished typing something out on his phone. "It's not like I tried to piss her off. She's your soulmate, and you're with another woman," Sam said, his rare serious side coming out at the moment. "You know she's still really sensitive about it, especially as you rejected the bond." Clint just turned away, helping Steve clean up the shards before leaving the room. "Great! So now I've got to prepare for two gods' arrivals and make sure not to put Triple Agent and Birdbrain on the same team for about 4 months," Tony muttered, making notes on a sheet of paper which he tucked into his back pocket. "I think Thor still has his room," Rhodes said. "Yeah, but unless we're keeping Loki in a cell." "He doesn't," Tony sighed. "He can bunk with Thor," Bucky said with a shrug. "That will just piss him off," Bruce said, sighing as well. "I'm going down to the lab." "Well, I'm going to take Blizzard to the pool." "Come on," Bucky said, coming over to me. I leapt up onto his shoulder. the pool? Sam, Scott, and Rode all questioned at the same time. Oh yeah, she loves the water, Bucky said with a grin. See you guys later. We went back up to his room and he changed into some strange material pants and nothing else. He had very large lines on his chest that made squares, and they looked very strange. I wondered how he'd gotten those lines imprinted on his chest. I wondered what I would look like with the tiny little lines on my chest. Bucky and I went outdoors to the pool. There was actually several of them. There was one large deep pool that most of the others swam in. Then there was a rectangular pool above ground that was called a jacuzzi or a jacuzzi or something like that. Apparently it was much warmer than normal and had lots of jets trailing out of it, making the water froth. Then there was a kitten pool. Or maybe it was a kiddie pool? No, it must definitely be the kitten pool. I went there after all. Once Bucky put me down, I padded over to the water and climbed in it. It wasn't very deep. On a toddler, it was only up to their ankles. However, as I was about the height of a toddler's ankle, I was standing up to my chin in water. I flounced around enjoying the feeling of not too cold water on my fur while Bucky lay down in the water. He had sunglasses on, so I wasn't sure if he had his eyes closed or not. Steve lounged on a long plastic chair, a book in his hand. Sam, Tony, Clint, Scott, and Rode were in the other pool, playing some sort of game with a ball. Oi, Terminator, Capsicle, come and join us to get the right numbers, Tony shouted over to the two of them. Bucky sat up in the water, looking at them, before getting to his feet and leaping into the other pool. I padded out of the kitten pool, shaking my fur before padding over to the edge of the deep pool. I watched as they passed a rather large ball around. It was multicolored, and it also seemed rather floaty. It seemed like a ball that could easily get carried away on the wind, so it was a good thing there was none today. I laid out flat as a pancake, letting the hot summer sun dry my fur up until I felt myself start to bake. Only then did I get to my feet, padding around to the other side of the pool. They had long since abandoned the ball, moving on to some other game, with one of them idiotically wandering around the pool with their eyes closed saying Marco, and the others responded with Polo. I batted at the ball, which bobbed up and down in the water. It seemed like a very thin ball, like a claw could pop it. It started to float out towards the open sea, and I batted it, trying to get it to come back to me. I yowled in frustration as the ball just darted out of reach, and then yowled in panic as I overstepped, falling into the water. I kicked back up to the surface, yakking nasty chemical water out of my mouth. Two hands were very quick in saving me. Tony put me back up on the surface, and then grabbed the ball, putting it on the concrete. Careful, Blizzard. I mewed, shaking my fur. The ball was at least triple my height, and I tried to leap up on it. Unfortunately, it was slippery, and I fell back to the concrete with a frustrated hiss. I raised my claw and attempted to pop it, but it just skirted across the concrete and back into the pool. I hissed at it. Stupid mean ball. I surveyed the water that the men were playing in again, padding around to the other side where the stairs were. The first stair was about as deep as the kitten pool, but the others were much farther underwater. I cried out in distress, wanting to be with Bucky and the others, but not knowing how to get to them. I leapt, flopping on into the water, paddling over to Sam. He glanced down in surprise before scooping me up in his hand. "What are you doing out here, Blizz?" "Think she wants to join?" Clint asked. "Here," Rose said, grabbing a strange pink thing. Sam placed me inside. I floated on the water, my paws on the outside of the rubber plastic floating device. It had a bottom, so that I didn't have to hold on for dear life. But there were also a few holes, so I could play in the water, if I wanted to. I floated around the pool, getting wet pets from everyone, and by the time they all climbed out of the pool to go back inside and call it a day, I was exhausted. "Come on, Blizzard, let's go get some food," Bucky said, picking me up out of the inflatable. I mewed in agreement, and I fell asleep as he carried me inside. Chapter 20. The men called Loki and Thor were coming today. I was curled up in the corner with a stuffed animal, cuddling it. It was white, like me, with several different black spots on it. Bucky called it a panda bear. I thought it just looked like an Oreo with eyes. It didn't taste like an Oreo, though. Not that I was supposed to know what Oreos tasted like anyways. But it was Sam's fault for leaving them out. Even though half of them freaked and took me down to Bruce to see if I was going to die from chocolate poisoning. But I didn't, so I think I should be allowed to eat more. Bruce wasn't here at the moment, not wanting to greet Loki when he came in. Apparently Loki had done bad things to Bruce, so they weren't on good terms. Actually, none of them seemed to be on good terms with this Loki person. Wanda and Vision had taken Billy and Tommy away, too, far across the country, and once Pepper found out, she said she wasn't coming back to Stark Tower with Morgan until Loki was gone. So I assumed that Loki was a bad person. Bucky and Steve sat together at the table while they waited. They were in a heated discussion about cake. I liked cake, especially with vanilla icing. I wasn't allowed to eat it, though. Tony, on the other hand, was sitting next to me, petting me. He seemed extremely stressed about the whole Loki situation, so I gave him lots of kisses to try and cheer him up. It seemed to work for the most part. Nat, on the other hand, looked utterly bored. She was sitting up on the table, cleaning the dirt from under her nails with a blade. Rode was standing near Tony, arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't talking to anyone, just staring out the window. Meanwhile, Fury was on the far side of the room, with a woman named Maria. I hissed at him whenever he came within 10 feet of me. He never came within 10 feet of me. Sam and Clint were having a loud conversation about Pop-Tarts, and whether they had enough in the tower for Thor. I wondered what a Pop-Tart was, and if I could eat it. I was hungry. "Can I have food?" I asked Tony, rolling over onto my back. Tony smiled, rubbing my belly. "You're adorable, Blizzard." "No, I'm hungry," I whined, rolling back onto my stomach to bat at his legs. "Give me food." Suddenly, there was a loud crash of loud noise, and I looked up just in time to see a roaring rainbow rushing down from the sky. Interesting. But the loud noise also made me run under the table and slink down. "Aw, come here, Blizz," Tony said softly, reaching under the table to pull me out. "It's just thunder." He looked up at Rode. "Did he do it on the lawn again?" "Nope, he used the helipad like you asked him to," Rode replied, turning away from the window. It didn't take long for two men to walk through the doors. Everyone straightened up, standing if they had been sitting, including Tony, who left me on the floor by his feet. I pounced back on the Oreo, rolling around with it before I settled down to get a good look at the men. One had brown, spiky hair, looking like he was trying to copy that one vampire's hairdo from that one TV show. Elijah, I think? He was very buff with large arms and two different colored eyes. He had a larger axe hammer thing in one hand and was wearing silver armor with a red cape. He grinned widely and said, "Hello again, my friends." "Hello, Thor," Nat said sweetly. "Welcome back." I turned my attention to the second man, who looked extremely uncomfortable. He had long black hair that was curly. His eyes were blue and shimmery. His face was pale and smooth, much unlike his brother's, which had the trimmings of a beard. He was tall and thin, and any muscles he might have had were hidden under his green clothing. It was as though I had been hit by a lightning bolt. I got to my feet, slowly padding over to where the man in green, Loki, was standing. "Blizzard, come here," Tony called quickly, but I didn't listen. I padded straight up to the god of mischief and batted his shoes. "Pick me up," I demanded. Loki bent down, picking me up in his hands. We stared at each other curiously before his eyes shifted down to my paws, specifically the back paw where my only black mark was. His eyes widened, staring back at me. "Your name," he whispered so softly I could barely hear him, so I knew the others could not. "Daddy!" I cried. He set me back down on the floor, squatting down with me. I put my paws on his knee. "Help me!" "Blizzard, come here, girl," Bucky pleaded. He sounded nervous, and I wondered why. Why were they so scared of him? I remembered everything now, my entire life, every moment. Loki stood back up and turned to Thor. "Give me your cloak." Thor raised an eyebrow. I remembered him too now, but swung the red cloak over to Loki. Loki put a hand over me, and I could feel the magic tingling in my bones. I could feel it changing me, helping me grow until I was no longer a kitten, but a human. "What the fuck?" Bucky, Steve, and Tony all asked together. I sat there with my your eye color eyes still on my father. My long hair color hair flowed down my shoulders, covering my entire back, and my father bent down, wrapping my naked body in my uncle's cloak. I could feel the strange tattoos on my arms tingling, and everything now made sense. If I looked down, I could see the crown-shaped birthmark on my hip, the one that had looked almost like a black tattoo on my paw. "Holy shit!" Bucky cursed again. I turned to face them, keeping close to my father, afraid of their reactions. Bucky's face was the one I saw first. His blue eyes were wide, his face slack with shock. He had taken a few steps towards me from where I had padded over to my father as a kitten. Steve was next, still frozen where he had been before, his blue eyes full of suspicion and uncertainty. Tony looked completely taken aback, having sat down in a chair, a hand covering his mouth as he rested his elbow on his leg. "Can someone just explain what happened?" Sam finally asked. Loki glared at all of them, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. "This is your name, Loki daughter, and if the name doesn't give it away, she is my daughter." "I didn't know you had a daughter," Nat said. "Thor never told us. She went missing a long time ago," Thor interrupted. He gave me a loving glance. "Before New York, before all of that, before you even knew us." "Then, how? What?" Tony seemed absolutely shocked. "I was kidnapped during one of the invasions," I whispered. Bucky and Steve both jerked upon hearing my name, their hands flying to where the last soulmate tattoo was. There was a witch with them, who turned me into a cat and hid me in her pocket. When Odin banished her to Midgard, I was taken with her. I stayed with her for many years, but then there was a problem. She erased my memories, and the next thing I remember is ending up in Mr. Peter's house." "Which witch?" Thor asked. "I think her name was Agatha," I said softly. "Well," Fury drawled from the back of the room, "I would hate to say I told you so. Who am I kidding? I told you so." "I'm not a spy," I said, but I couldn't even be angry about it. "Maybe not," Fury said, while Loki's arms tightened around me. "But I did say that any cat with supernatural powers was not really a cat." I gave a nod of assent. Perhaps that was true. "Well," my father sounded more cheerful than before. "I suppose my visit will have to be cut short then." He looked at my Uncle Thor. "Mother will want to see her especially." "Yes, of course," Thor said boisterously. He was just as loud as I remembered, but I was only glad that I was back with my family again. "Wait," Bucky said hurriedly. "She can't leave yet." My heart twisted painfully. "Why not?" Loki asked angrily. "She's our soulmate. You can't just take her away from us," Steve said. "Ah," Loki said with distaste. "She will not be joining your soulmate stuff. And you can't make that decision for her." "He's not," Thor said with obvious regret. "It is our law. Gods cannot be soulmates with humans. Our lifespans far outlive yours, and it would only lead to pain and suffering on your names. Part when you die in 20 or 30 or 40 years, and she lives for 1,000 or two more." "It is against our law to do so," Loki added. "Doing so would banish her from Asgard for life." "We have waited for her for forever," Bucky said. I think he was trying to sound angry, but all he did was sound hurt, and that hurt me too. "It will be fine," Loki spat. "You do not need her. You already have 2 Mulenquim on the side already." Bucky's mouth dropped like he had been slapped, while Steve sat down in his chair looking mortified, both of them realizing a lot of things at that moment. Tony glared furiously at the two of them, and then glared at Nat, who was blushing just slightly. "Father," I whispered. "That wasn't fair. Now that I had my memories, I had taken a fair share of lovers into my bed as well. It was technically against the law in Asgard to shag outside of marriage, but no one listened to it. It had become a useless law." "No, your name. I cannot see you get hurt like that." I took a deep breath. "Steve and Bucky are also immortal, Father. It's different with them." Thor and Loki looked at each other. "We will have to speak to our father," Thor said, sounding troubled. "Perhaps it would be safer for you to stay here at the moment." Loki looked disappointed, but nodded as well. "Someone get her some clothes," he snapped at the others before he and Thor drew me away into a corner. "Are you sure this is what you want, sweetheart?" Loki asked softly. "Yes, Dad," I whispered. "I have found that I already love them. I think it would hurt more to not be with them. And they really are immortal, so it should make a difference in the law." "I will speak to Odin about it," Loki said, sounding troubled as well by this idea. "Hopefully Mother will help persuade as well. I love you." "I love you too," I mumbled, hugging him tightly. He kissed the top of my head. "Here, Blizz, your name," Sam said, holding out some clothes. "Thanks, Birdbrain," I said softly. He grinned. "You've been hanging around Tony too much." Loki put up screens to block the others out while he and Thor turned so I could get dressed. It did take me a moment to figure out how to wear clothes, and when I was done I recognized one of Tony's AC/DC shirts and Bucky's Slytherin detailed sweatpants. Loki pursed his lips when he saw the clothing. "I will bring you proper Asgardian clothing when Thor and I return." I hugged Thor too, and it took a while for the both of them to actually leave, as we did not want to part so soon after finding each other again. I suddenly felt rather self-conscious when I was left with them by myself. Can we talk alone? Bucky asked awkwardly. I nodded, and the three of us left the room. Chapter 21. We ended up out by the pool again. I had rolled up Bucky's sweatpants, dangling my feet in the warm water. Bucky and Steve sat next to me on either side, giving me a little bit of room. Did you know you were human? Bucky asked softly. No, I had no memories, I whispered, kicking my feet a little. Will you accept the bond? Steve asked eagerly. I could see the tattoo of the dagger, surrounded by flowers, pulsing on his arm, flashing white and then back to its normal, inky black. I did not answer, not sure of my answer. I did not want to lose my father, uncle, and grandparents when I had only just gotten them back. On the other hand, I did really want this. I wanted their love, which I knew, though flawed, would make me extremely happy. What about Nat and the blonde girl? I asked softly. Even if I left, you could still have them. We don't want them, Bucky said fiercely. They were just for fun until we found our other third, until we found you. We said even if our soulmate rejected us, we would never be with another after finding her, Steve said softly. So now that we found you, we would never be with them, even after you left. If you leave. Please don't leave, Bucky begged. We've been waiting for you for 90 years. That really wasn't much longer than I had been waiting for them. I had been waiting for them for 700 years, being only 710 years old. I was a rather young one. That was part of the reason Thor and Loki were so worried about me being with these humans. If they died as they aged, I would live a long time with the pain. I glanced over at Bucky. He was holding his breath, waiting for a proclamation from me. I smiled a little. Well, I've already loved you for a while now. Bucky breathed out, his hand trailing around to the back of my head. Please let me kiss you. You may. Bucky pulled me in very quickly, his lips making mine give way to his from the force. He tasted bitter, like the coffee he'd been drinking, but also sweet, a slight vanilla taste from the donut. My fingers carted through his hair, the silk strands delicate in my touch. I could feel his hands gripping me tightly around the waist, not wanting to let go of me, before he pulled back slowly, leaning so that our foreheads touched. I love you. I blushed at the thought, cuddling into his chest. I love you too. Even if my love had been different as a cat, but I had always loved these humans, the ones that took care of me. I knew they would still take care of me. Steve was mostly quiet until Bucky was ready to let me go, which wasn't for quite a few minutes. Finally, Bucky's arms loosened around me, kissing me again before giving me a slight turn to face Steve. Steve's bottom lip was still being gnawed on from worry. His blue eyes were hesitant, and the golden light from the sun streamed in through the loose strands of his blonde hair, giving me a literal reason as to why Steve Rogers was the golden boy. Steve? He looked at me completely, looking at my outstretched hand for a moment. He blinked a few times, as though he'd been lost in thought and I had dragged him back into reality. He reached forward to grab it before pulling me onto his lap. I straddled him as he kissed me, and he was different from Bucky. His lips were softer, shaping against mine. I could taste a different sort of creamy vanilla, and also tartness of strawberries and lemon. His bottom tongue swiped mine, and I let him in. His hair was more bristly than Bucky's, and I ran my fingers along the top strands, over and over in a repetitive motion, as though I was petting him. His fingers clutched the back of my shirt and dug into my hip. I finally pulled away for air, and Steve's lips continued to travel down my neck to the hollow of my throat. He leaned back a little, the pit of desire in his eyes prominent but fading. I love you, your name. I love you too, Stevie, I replied with a soft smile, turning my own body this time so I could curl up in his lap. I held a hand out for Bucky, and he joined the three of us on the hard concrete of the pool deck. None of us seemed to care, wrapped up in each other's embrace. I accepted the bond, a warmth starting at the tip of my toes, embracing my entire body, until it faded up until each tattoo. A searing heat lit up on both tattoos before their names were etched inside of them. I'm sorry, Steve mumbled into my shoulder. Why? I asked, trying to look at him, but he kept his face buried into the cloth of my shirt. Well, Tony's shirt. Because of Nat and Sharon, Steve sighed. I don't know. I don't blame you for looking for comfort when I wasn't even here, I whispered, petting his hair. It was a soothing gesture, and I was starting to realize why people liked petting animals. It was calming and relaxing. Hell, I was a cat. Imagine if my father had never come here. Then he wouldn't have turned me back. I'd still be a cat right now. Steve shivered. I never thought I'd see the day where I was thankful Loki came along. I frowned a little. Was he really that bad? He was a bit mischievous when I was growing up, but he was never cruel or anything. He tried to take over Earth with aliens, using this tower as a calling beacon, Steve sighed. A lot of people died. Of course, we can't put too much blame on him because he was being mind-controlled. But at the same time... Oh, I frowned. I was going to have to check in with him. I couldn't believe anyone could have gotten the better of him. My father was indestructible. Nothing could kill him, no one could capture him, and I couldn't think of a single person that could mind-control him, for goodness sake. I'm sorry about that. I mean, that's an inadequate apology, but don't worry about it, doll, Bucky whispered, kissing the back of my neck. Now that I had accepted them, he couldn't keep himself to himself. Not that I minded, I loved the affection. If there's any two people in the world that could understand what Loki was going through, it would be me and Stevie here. I smiled, rolling myself over so that I was propped up on Bucky's stomach. Well, I'm glad you don't hate him. Bucky kissed me again. Do you want to go inside? I mean, I'm thinking you might want to introduce yourself to everyone again. A sudden spike of fear went through me. Pepper, will she still hate me? I don't think she ever hated you, Steve said. I think she was scared of you. There's a difference. Great, that makes me feel so much better, I muttered glumly. Don't worry, doll, we're here for you, Bucky said. I smiled at that and then got to my feet. With Bucky on my left and Steve on my right, I felt a little better about going into the tower to see everyone again. I could hold my own, of course. I was a formidable warrior. I had sparred with Sif, of course, and I had a little bit of magic. But I only had 100 years or so under my belt. I was nowhere close to my father's skill level. So, Sam was the first to approach us. Most everyone was still in the living room talking. Hi, Sammy, I said shyly, holding my arm awkwardly. Sam grinned. Well, hey there, Blizz. He held his arms out and I smiled brightly, hugging him back. I nearly purred when he enclosed me in a warm, perfect hug. Sam laughed, the vibration shaking against me. She still acts like a kitten, too. I blushed as I pulled away, retreating back to Bucky's side, who was smirking just slightly. Well, this is a bit weird, Tony said, scratching the back of his head. He was probably recalling all the things he told me when I was a cat. I padded over to him and wrapped my arms around him, trying to send him comfort. Thank you for trusting me with all your feelings, even if you thought I was just a cat. I could feel the hardness of the arc reactor against my forehead, but didn't move. I knew now that I couldn't actually dislodge it, that it was an unnecessary fear of Pepper's. Welcome to the Avengers, kid. Sorry you got stuck with the two old men, but I guess since you're technically an old woman yourself, you'll fit right in with them, Tony sighed, pulling back from the hug and giving me that familiar smirk. I smiled back. Old woman, huh? But you just call me kid. Well, you look pretty young for an old woman, Tony said. They have great health benefits on Asgard. I laughed. Everyone felt so familiar and safe. We all settled in talking, as I settled myself down on Bucky's lap. Sorry, but what was your real name again? Clint asked. Your name, I replied, but if you'd prefer to call me Blizz, I don't think I'd mind too much. Bucky kissed my cheek. All right, not in front of us, Barnes, Tony grumbled. So what is the overall plan? Sam asked, motioning to us. Well, my father went to talk to my grandparents, I answered thoughtfully. Usually, us Asgardians can't mate with Midgardians, even if they're our soulmates, because they die before us and it leaves us in forever heartbreak. However, since Buck and Steve are immortal, at least age-wise, my father and uncle are going to advocate on my behalf. I think my grandmother will convince my grandfather to let me be with them. And if not, well, that'll be a pain, since I already accepted them. But my father isn't that good at following the rules, so we'll definitely stay in contact regardless. Suddenly, the doors to the living room opened and everyone glanced over. Pepper was standing there, her hair pulled back into an immaculate bun. She was dressed professionally as she looked at us, her eyes widening in surprise upon seeing me. However, she addressed Tony first. I thought Loki and Thor were coming over today. Fury said so. They did, Tony said, and then Loki turned Blizzard into a human. Not just any human, but his daughter. And his daughter just happened to be soulmated to Capsicle and Terminator, so that's her right there. Your name? Pepper. Pepper, your name, formerly known as Blizzard. Pepper seemed stunned. The cat? she asked incredulously. I quickly repeated the story of being taken off Asgard and having a spell put on me so I couldn't remember my former life and that I genuinely thought I was a kitten. And, I added awkwardly, I'm sorry about Tony and Morgan. I didn't understand about the arc reactor. And, when I ripped your dress on the gala, it was because Tony had kissed my head, and I was trying to give you the kiss, but I didn't understand as a cat. Bucky's arms were tight around me, and Steve's hand drifted up to rest on my thigh, his hand squeezing tightly. Oh, Pepper breathed out, color coming to her cheeks, and suddenly seemed rather interested in the ceiling. It's all right, I'm sorry for my outburst. No, really, it's fine. I stumbled over my words in a rush to get them out. I completely understand. If the positions were reversed, I probably would have killed the cat, so I appreciate you for not doing that. Everything was awkward for a moment, and then Sam said, Right. So, what's for dinner? Sourdough bread. I perked right up, and chocolate, and... I looked at Tony and Steve. What else was I not allowed to have as a kitten? Pancakes with syrup and Oreos, Sam said with a grin. Yes, all of that, I replied with a matching grin. All right, doll, Bucky said, lifting me up and slinging me over his shoulder. Steve and I'll cook. I giggled as Bucky carried me to the kitchen, and he put a variety of foods together. It was a nice family night, and for once, I could be a part of it. Chapter 22. Hey, I said softly, leaning against the doorway to Tony's lab. Hey kid, come on in, Tony said, barely glancing up from where he was working. Once I was standing by the table, though, he pushed his chair back to look up at me. Thought you, Rogers, and Barnes were going to Asgard today. We are, I said softly, but, for the wedding, well, my father can't walk me down the aisle like he wanted to because he has to play another more Asgardian role for the wedding. So I was wondering if you wanted to come and walk me down the aisle. I know this is terrible timing, but my father unfortunately couldn't let me know he had to play the part of the crowning bear. Don't ask, I can't remember which role that is. So this is the soonest I can ask you, and I know you're super busy. Okay, Tony said softly, interrupting me mid-sentence. I smiled, relaxing. Look, kid, Tony said, standing up, wiping his hands on a rag. Even when you were a cat, I loved you like a child of my own. Maybe that's weird, but I've heard of people caring about their pets like they're their kids. I don't know, I always felt protective of you, and even now, getting to know you as a human, I feel that same sort of fatherly instinct. I know you've already got a dad, but I kinda like thinking of you like I'm a second dad. I grinned wider. Well, that's perfect, because I look up to you like a second dad. Or at least an uncle. Tony grinned, pulling me into a hug. Barnes and Rogers are two lucky guys, your name. Now, where do we have to go to leave for Asgard? Well, in 30 minutes, I figure you'll either want to tell Pepper you're leaving or bring her with you, Morgan too, I said with a bashful shrug. Got it, Tony said, nodding. Packing, Pepper, Morgan, 30 minutes, understood. See you then. See you soon. I was trembling as I hooked my arm around Tony's. He was dressed in formal Asgardian wear, which was a black suit with golden and red armor over it. He was wearing his tinted sunglasses, just to spite them. I had talked to my father, and as upset as he was about not being able to walk me down the aisle, he had reluctantly agreed to let Tony walk me down. At the moment, my father was standing in his normal green and gold at the end of the aisle with Uncle Thor, my grandmother, and grandfather. The priest was also there, along with Sif, who was my one and only maid of honor. Sam was Bucky's best man. Clint was Steve's. My father was holding the ceremonial crowns that would solidify our bonding. They were spiritual crowns, not literal crowns, and would become mist once the bond was solidified. Only the father of one of the married peoples could hold them. Since my father was the only one alive, he was the only one that could hold them. Tony handed me off, and Steve and Bucky each took one of my hands. Tony went and sat down next to Pepper, pulling Morgan onto his lap. There had been some questioning to our vows. Steve and Bucky had been expecting to be married in a church before God, the two of them being devout Christians. However, realizing that we were going to be married on Asgard, the one condition of my grandfather to let them marry me, they were freaking out about their vows. However, I told them that if they believed in their God and Jesus, then I wasn't going to judge. For all we knew, their God did exist in another realm. I wasn't going to ridicule them for that belief. And to show that I was serious with this, I told them that I would say the same vow. I had also warned my entire family and all Asgardian guests about it, so that there wouldn't be gasps of surprise. Grandfather hadn't been pleased, and Father had rolled his eyes, but Grandmother and my uncle seemed supportive. Father stepped forward, putting the crowns on Steve and Bucky's heads hastily before turning to me. He placed it upon my head with care, kissing my brow before stepping back. His eyes glistened, not with tears, of course. I think he just had an eyelash in his eye, or something like that. Steve started first, swallowing nervously. In the name of God, I, Steve Rogers, take you, your name, lawful daughter, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until parted by death. I followed next. In the name of God, I, your name, lawful daughter, take you, Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes, to be my husbands, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until parted by death. I actually liked the words. They held so much meaning, so much care, so much love. Even if perhaps I didn't believe in that particular god, being a goddess myself, the words of the vow seemed powerful. In the name of God, I, James Barnes, take you, your name, lawful daughter, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until parted by death. Bucky swallowed even harder than Steve, and then added, to this I swear. I smiled, a singular tear dripping down my cheek, and I hastily wiped it away. The crowns dissolved into golden smoke, swirling around the three of us before settling like gold sparkles on our soulmate tattoos, sinking in so that the tattoos were outlined in a light gold color. Grandmother was enjoying the ceremony the most, and quite cheerfully said, "You may now kiss the bride." I kissed Steve first, passionately, and then Bucky. The others cheered and clapped, and we moved away from the altar. "Here," Steve whispered to the two of us as we got just a moment of alone time as things shifted from wedding to party. He pulled out simple rings. Rings weren't part of the wedding. "Bucky, I love you," Steve whispered, sliding the gold with a singular diamond ring onto Bucky's ring finger, as he very well couldn't wear it on his left. He pulled out a second ring, gold as well, with a white sapphire on it. "Your name, I love you." "Steve," I murmured softly as he slipped the ring onto my left hand. "I love you too." Bucky had choked up, words unable to come out of his mouth, so he simply responded by kissing Steve with as much passion as possible. I smiled, watching the two of them. As my father passed me, he pressed something into my hand and continued past. I was surprised, but opening my hand and then smiled. "Steve," I said, taking his left hand and sliding the gold ring with a singular blue sapphire onto it. "Bucky, I love you too." Steve teared up next, sweeping me into a passionate kiss. "Thank you, Cookie." "My father gave it to me," I admitted. Steve looked surprised and then said, "Another thing I'm glad about Loki. I might actually start liking him." I giggled. "That would be horrendous. Please stay enemies." Steve grinned at me. "Come on, Cookie, we have a party to attend to." Bucky suddenly straightened up, glaring at something in the corner before blinking. "Bucky?" I asked. He let out a long breath. "Sorry, I honestly thought I saw Sharon. Stupid brain." I laughed, taking his hand. "Come on, stupid brain. Let's go dance." Sharon had been kicked out of the tower when she had tried to attack me. Well, she hadn't tried to attack me at first. She had approached me in the hallway and verbally threatened me that I needed to leave Steve and Bucky. She told me a lot of cruel and unnecessary comments, building on some uncertainties that I had already had when I had been a kitten. Natasha, surprisingly, was the one that had come across and had told Sharon to shove off, that Steve and Bucky deserved better than Sharon, that they deserved me. Natasha told her that if they wanted me, then who was Sharon to try and stop their happiness? Sharon had gone away. Another day later, she'd nearly killed me. I'd been in my hiding place, or my kitten hiding place. There was this huge sudden push and I had fallen over the railing. I had braced myself for death before Sam, who had been practicing with his wings that day, caught me. He had swooped straight up to the balcony I had been thrown off, putting me on my feet and burst through the door. Friday, who I liked all the more now that I was human and not a cat, had alerted Sam where Sharon, though she hadn't said Sharon at the time, had gone. Sam had tackled her and now she was on the run because she had escaped somehow. Still not sure how. I was also made aware that Rhodes' name was actually not Rode. It was Rhodey. They called him Rhodes for short. It still sounded like Road to me, though. I digress. We danced the entire night long, and then we headed off to the bedchambers. I love you, your name, Bucky whispered. I love you, your name, Steve murmured from behind me. I love the both of you, I whispered, holding the both of them to me as we drifted off to sleep. Chapter 23. Mom! Mom! Sebastian came running, his long brown hair flying out behind him as he raced across the ground. His little sisters, Scarlet and Winter, came toddling after him, their blonde hair glistening in the sun, their matching scarves tight around their neck. What's wrong? I asked automatically, getting to my feet where I was sitting with Steve and Bucky. We'd been relaxing in the backyard of our house. Bucky was scrolling on a phone, his wedding ring winking in the sun by the fire pit. Steve had kicked back with a newspaper, the complete contrast to Bucky. Meanwhile, I had been flicking through a new book I'd bought. Come look what we found, Sebastian said with a big goofy grin on his face. You won't believe it. How about you bring it here, Steve suggested, looking up. Your mother isn't supposed to be on her feet too much right now. That was true. I was pregnant with triplets that were due within the next month. I sat back down gingerly in my chair. Scarlet and Winter climbed up on Bucky's chair, both of them trying to get his metal arm. Without even looking at them, Bucky held his metal arm out over the chair, and the two girls giggled, clinging to it as they dangled a few inches over the deck. What is so great about that phone? Steve scolded Bucky. Bucky barely glanced up. Well, Clint told me I should check out Tinder. I don't know what it is exactly yet. I started to laugh. Oh my gosh, that is such a Clint thing to do. Steve looked repulsed. Isn't that like porn or something? I dissolved into giggles again. No, it's a dating site. Bucky finally looked up and squinted at me. Wait, but why do I need a dating site? It's a joke, I replied, covering my smile terribly with my hand. Bucky grumbled, swiping off the phone and clearly deleting an app. What else did Clint tell you to check out? Pornhub, but I already skipped that one. I'm not a complete idiot. Then something called OnlyFans, Reddit, and TikTok. Those are all complete garbage, I replied. You don't have to look at them. Well, maybe Reddit if you're looking at cute baby animals. So what should I look at? Bucky grumbled. I don't understand. Pinterest, Instagram, oh, definitely Wattpad. I rattled off on my most used apps. You can post about our family on Instagram if you want, and Wattpad is kind of like a fan-based writing sort of thing. Although I guess it's a lot like written porn, and Pinterest is just kind of an aesthetic thing. Sebastian came running back across the grass, holding a huge cardboard box. What in the world? I asked. Seb, what's in the box? Look, Sebastian said, placing the box at my feet. I peered in and saw that there were like 8 or 9 black baby kittens in the box. They could all easily fit in the palm of Steve's hand. Gosh, Seb, where in the world did you find this? I asked, eyes widening. Was there no mother? They don't look old enough by themselves. There can't be a mother, Bucky said, having put the phone and children down. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in a box. This is a new box. They were only put in there today. Someone was... He drifted off, trying to get rid of them, I finished, like Mr. Peters did with me. Bucky's hand clenched into a fist. Even after so many years, Mr. Peters and me being a kitten, and him dumping me in the reflecting pool was still a sore spot for both Bucky and Steve. Yeah, that. Steve grunted, putting the newspaper aside. May he forever rest in hell. Bucky snarled. Buck? Steve and I patronized, motioning to the kids. I meant capital H, lowercase e, and 2 hockey sticks. Bucky rolled his eyes, patting Winter on the head. Bad daddy. Scarlet patronized, looking at him solemnly with her 4-year-old eyes. That's right, sweetheart. Bad daddy, Steve said with a grin, winking at Bucky, who grew rather flustered. What are we going to do with the kittens? Bucky asked quickly, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. We can take care of them, I said with a shrug. I mean, we'll have to get a special formula for them, of course. Take them to the vet. But I don't see why we can't keep them, even if there are a lot of them. They're not any cousins of yours, are they, doll? Bucky asked with a sparkling grin. I rolled my eyes. Every time we saw a cat, they immediately asked if I knew him or her. If they are, I haven't been alerted to their earthly presence. Steve chuckled, standing up finally and coming over and rubbing my shoulders. That's a lot of cats to name. I've got them, Bucky said comfortably. He pointed to each one as he named them. Alpha, Calypso, Cloud, Cosmo, Luna, Nova, Sirius, and Stella. Steve, Sebastian, Winter, Scarlet, and I all looked at him in surprise. Bucky shrugged, cheeks burning again. They're all space names. I mean, you kids can name them if you want. I like them, Dad, Sebastian said eagerly. They're great names. I like Luna the best, Scarlet declared, scooping up the kitten that Bucky had dubbed Luna. Gently, Scar, Steve said, and showed her the best way to hold the kitten and how you had to hold her gently. I caught Bucky's eyes and we both smiled. Every single time Steve did something fatherly with the kids, it actually turned both of us on. Except at the moment I was too big to actually do anything except lay there. All right, Bucky said, quickly scooping up his phone and putting it in his back pocket. It's been a long, busy day. Let's get the cats in, make sure they have some water at least, maybe a little chicken. Actually, it might be better if we start them off on cat food, right? Then they won't be picky like you. He nudged me a little. Rolling my eyes once more, I waddled into the house. Steve and Bucky helped the kids in the kitchen get the kittens all ready while I climbed into bed. I could only lay on my back at this point, but I knew very soon I wasn't going to be getting any sleep at all with triplets. Steve and Bucky put the kids to bed before coming in and laying down next to me. Steve slipped his ring off and put it on the dresser next to the bed. He rolled over again to hug me from one side, Bucky on the other. Kittens are in the kitchen, kids are in their beds, all the shades are closed, lights are out, and all the doors and windows are locked, Bucky said before yawning, snuggling into me. Thank you, love, I mumbled, closing my eyes, letting my men be my warmth. We love you, your name, Steve muttered. I love both of you too, I said quietly, falling asleep as it started to snow outside. The end.